Welcome, fellow literary explorers, to a journey across time, culture, and the uncharted landscapes of the human soul. In today's video, we'll be delving into the essence of 5 must-read classics, each one a literary milestone in its own right. Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, On the Road by Jack Kerouac, Tess of D'Urberville by Thomas Hardy, Absalom by William Faulkner, and The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. These books span continents and centuries, yet each has a timeless message that resonates with us even now, unearthing universal truths about culture, identity, fate, and the power of imagination. Brace yourselves for Things Fall Apart, a novel that introduced the world to the beating heart of African literature. Achebe's masterpiece pulls back the veil on pre-colonial Nigeria, portraying the Igbo people's customs, beliefs, and way of life. Through the tragic rise and fall of Okonkwo, the story is both an intimate portrait of a man's struggle against change and a searing commentary on the forces that shape societies. Prepare to witness how tradition, power, and resilience collide in a narrative that refuses to be forgotten. Next, rev up your wanderlust with Jack Kerouac's On the Road, a wild, freewheeling ride across the highways of post-war America. More than a mere travelogue, it's a hymn to youth, spontaneity, and the untamed spirit that dares to question the status quo. Brace yourself for jazz-filled nights and dusty plains as Kerouac's beat generation leaps off the page, reminding us that life, like the open road, is best experienced when we let ourselves roam free. We'll then wander into the pastoral world of Thomas Hardy's Tess of D'Urberville, a heartrending tale of innocence and betrayal. Hardy's vivid portrait of rural England sets the stage for Tess's fierce determination in the face of society's suffocating expectations. Get ready to witness how love, tragedy, and the cruel hands of fate intertwine in a story that demands we question the moral fabric of the world we live in. Our odyssey continues with William Faulkner's Absalom, a Southern Gothic epic unraveling the dark legacies of history and the enduring power of family myths. Layer by layer, Faulkner peels back the haunted corners of Mississippi, revealing how one man's grand ambition can reverberate across generations, forever twisting the truth in its wake. Finally, we'll soar into the whimsical realm of The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, a tender meditation on innocence, friendship, and the mysteries that hide in plain sight. It's a gentle reminder that sometimes the deepest wisdom can be found through childlike wonder, asking us to look beneath the surface of grown-up concerns and rediscover what truly matters. So buckle up and turn the page with us as we embark on this grand tour of 5 unforgettable novels. Prepare to be captivated, challenged, and ultimately changed by the magic of the written word. Let the adventure begin. Picture yourself in a bustling Igbo village named Umuofia, located in what is now southeastern Nigeria, sometime in the late 19th century, before the full force of British colonial rule and Christian missionary influence has swept through. There's a vibrant tapestry of daily life here. Open-air markets packed with yams and palm oil, communal gatherings punctuated by ritual drumbeats, and kinship ties that bind people together in a tight web of shared religion, customs, and traditions. In this world, a man's worth is measured by his titles, his achievements in wrestling, his prowess in warfare, and his ability to provide for his family and clan. Society is guided by a pantheon of gods and oracles, ancestral spirits, and strict social norms that foster both unity and conflict. Within this dynamic environment emerges our protagonist, Okonkwo, a man of intense drive, and larger-than-life ambition. At the story's opening, he has already become a famed wrestler, a respected warrior, and a prosperous farmer. Yet underlying his outward strength is a deep-seated fear, an all-consuming terror of becoming anything like his father, Anoka, who was scorned for his laziness, constant debt, and lack of ambition. Because of his father's failures, Okonkwo vows to forge a name and legacy defined by hard work, discipline, and most importantly, a strict adherence to what he believes to be true manliness. This is the lens through which he sees his entire life and interacts with everyone around him. Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart is, at its core, the story of one man's journey to secure his reputation and preserve his vision of tradition at a time of cultural upheaval. Yet it's also a portrait of an entire community, one that is rich, multifaceted, and soon to be rocked by the forces of colonialism and religious change. From the very first pages, you'll notice a quiet tension simmering beneath the ordinary rhythms of village life. Rumors circulate about the white man's arrival, about new forms of worship in neighboring lands, about alliances that have begun to crumble. For now, the people of Yumwofia continue their time-honored practices, but something monumental is on the horizon. To truly understand Okonkwo, you have to peer into the shadow cast by his father, Anoka. Anoka was a gentle man who loved music and conversation, but could never seem to hold on to his wealth, or even feed his family adequately. This left Okonkwo with a burning resentment for anything resembling laziness or softness. He resolved early in life to be the exact opposite: hardworking, controlling, and quick to anger if he sensed any hint of weakness. As a teenager, Okonkwo gained fame by defeating a legendary wrestler named Amelins the Cat, a feat that vaulted him to stardom and respect within the clan. This gave him confidence and set him on the path to success. By the time we meet him, Okonkwo is in his 30s and has 3 wives and multiple children. He's amassed numerous yam barns, symbolic of prosperity, and has earned 2 prestigious titles in the village, marking him as a man of formidable status. He cuts a striking figure, tall, muscular, with a severe expression, prone to outbursts of rage. His family members, wives and children alike, tread carefully around him, knowing that even minor infractions can unleash his wrath. Yet Okonkwo's success isn't just about personal pride. In the Igbo worldview, ensuring familial and communal stability is paramount. He believes he is acting correctly by enforcing discipline, by pushing his sons to be fearless and hardworking, and by leading his household with an iron fist. One early episode highlights the tensions in his household, when Okonkwo perceives his youngest wife, Ojugo, to be neglecting her duties by leaving her hut to visit a friend. He lashes out during the sacred week of peace, a time when violence is strictly forbidden. This transgression unsettles the entire community. It's not just a private altercation. Okonkwo must appease the gods with sacrifices, and the elders scold him, worried that his quick temper disrespects tradition. While Okonkwo obeys the prescribed penance, he privately resents the interruption to his routine, stubbornly holding on to the notion that showing leniency would be an unforgivable sign of weakness. Shortly thereafter, a twist of fate brings a boy named Ikamafuna into Okonkwo's life. Ikamafuna is offered to Yumwofia by a neighboring village as part of a settlement to avoid warfare. It is decided he will live with Okonkwo until the oracle instructs otherwise. Though he hails from outside Yumwofia, Ikamafuna becomes an integral part of Okonkwo's family. He quickly bonds with Okonkwo's oldest son, Nwoi, who is drawn to Ikamafuna's warmth, storytelling gifts, and gentle leadership. Nwoi admires Ikamafuna as an older brother figure, and in many ways, Ikamafuna fills a gap that Okonkwo himself struggles to address: an emotional connection and nurturing style of guidance. Despite himself, Okonkwo grows fond of Ikamafuna, yet he's careful not to show it, maintaining a stoic veneer lest he betray any sign of paternal tenderness. Over 3 years, Ikamafuna thrives in the household, becoming part of the clan's daily rhythms, learning their customs, and breathing new life into Nwoi, who is often at odds with his father's unyielding harshness. Under Ikamafuna's influence, Nwoi begins to adopt more traditionally masculine behaviors, which pleases Okonkwo, if only grudgingly. This short-lived domestic stability hints at a path not taken, a future in which Okonkwo might soften, where a loving father-son relationship could flourish. But destiny and the complex codes of the Oracle steer things toward tragedy. The quiet harmony surrounding Ikamafuna takes a brutal turn when the Oracle of the Hills and the Caves, the local spiritual authority, decrees that the boy must be killed. The exact reasoning is steeped in Igbo mysticism, implying that Ikamafuna's life is a necessary sacrifice to maintain cosmic order. The clan's elders relay this decision to Okonkwo, cautioning him not to take part in the actual deed because Ikamafuna calls him father. Okonkwo, however, fears appearing weak above all else. Spurred by a misguided sense of duty and his obsessive quest to show manliness, he not only joins the killing party, but delivers the final blow as Ikamafuna, disoriented and betrayed, cries out for help. This moment is one of the most chilling and pivotal scenes in the novel. It crackles with tension as Ikamafuna senses that something is off, yet trusts Okonkwo until the last second. When Okonkwo's machete falls, it severs not just Ikamafuna's life, but also any semblance of emotional wholeness in Okonkwo's household. In the aftermath, Nwoi is traumatized, wrestling with grief and confusion about a culture and a father that would commit such a brutal act. Okonkwo, for his part, experiences a rare surge of regret and existential dread. For days, he cannot eat or sleep comfortably, and though he tries to bury his sorrow under the veneer of manly stoicism, the event triggers a subtle unraveling of his emotional and spiritual moorings. In the weeks following Ikamafuna's death, a heavy pall hangs over Okonkwo's compound. Nwoi becomes quieter, more withdrawn, and internally begins to question the moral framework of the clan's traditions. This isn't the first time he's been disturbed by the ways of his people. He's also unsettled by customs like the abandonment of newborn twins in the forest, but Ikamafuna's murder shatters his fragile acceptance of these norms. Okonkwo notices Nwoi's distancing, yet any attempt to address it is muddied by his own shame, fury, and inability to express vulnerability. Instead, he doubles down on his harshness. Meanwhile, daily life in Umwofia continues, but subtle changes are evident. Social ceremonies, harvest festivals, and communal rituals proceed as usual, though rumblings about the white man and strange, new gods grow louder. Some villagers dismiss these rumors as exaggerations. Others sense a gathering storm. Okonkwo tries to refocus on his own ambition, keen to climb further up the social ladder by taking additional titles and expanding his influence. Yet a foreboding sense of disquiet clings to him. Unbeknownst to him at the time, the death of Ikamafuna marks the beginning of a profound transformation in his own life trajectory and in the fate of the entire clan. A year or so after Ikamafuna's death, a funeral is held for an elder in Umwofia. Funerals here are raucous affairs, complete with drumming, dancing, and the firing of guns into the air. In the midst of this celebration-turned mourning, Okonkwo's gun accidentally goes off, killing Izuda's 16-year-old son. In Igbo law, taking a life under these circumstances is labeled a female crime, an unintentional offense that still demands consequences. Because blood has been spilled and Okonkwo's hand was involved, he must be exiled from Umuofia for 7 years. The blow is devastating. This man who prided himself on his impeccable rise to power and status must abruptly leave behind his compound, his farmland, and the community where he's built his reputation. He retreats to Mbanta, his mother's natal village, taking his immediate family with him. Yet in Umuofia, all that he has built, houses, barns, livestock, are burned according to tradition, both to purge the land of the taint of bloodshed and as a symbolic reset. For Okonkwo, who measures success by material wealth and social prestige, it's a punishing downfall. He's forced to start anew in a place where he has fewer personal ties and less influence. And so begins another chapter in which Okonkwo must grapple with personal humiliation and a creeping sense that his destiny is slipping away. In Mbanta, Okonkwo's maternal uncle, Uchendu, receives him warmly, providing him with plots of land to cultivate yams. Nevertheless, Okonkwo is tormented by his fall from grace. Instead of viewing exile as a temporary setback, he treats it as a near-complete ruin of all he's achieved. In Igbo society, there is a certain comfort in returning to one's maternal homeland in times of crisis. It's seen as a place of refuge, where a person can be nurtured back to strength. But Okonkwo's rigid view of masculinity prevents him from fully accepting this maternal sanctuary. He resents his own dependence and bristles at any hint of pity. Uchendu, who is wiser and more measured, repeatedly counsels Okonkwo to moderate his destructive pride. He reminds his nephew of the importance of humility and adaptability, essential values in Igbo culture that allow the community to endure hardships. Okonkwo listens but remains fixated on his thwarted ambitions in Umuofia. He invests himself in sowing new yam fields, but a deep well of bitterness lingers. It is during this time of exile that the seeds of wider change reach Mbanta and, by extension, Okonkwo's family. Missionaries arrive, preaching a new religion centered on one God and a Savior named Jesus Christ, a belief system that at first seems incomprehensible to the locals. Life in Mbanta takes a seismic turn when a small band of Christian missionaries, led by a gentle but determined man named Mr. Brown, sets up camp in the village. Curious onlookers gather to listen to their sermons, initially more out of amusement than genuine interest. The missionaries speak of the Trinity, heaven, and a God who is distinctly different from the pantheon of Igbo deities. They condemn the practice of abandoning twins in the forest, a practice the Igbo see as necessary to rid the clan of an abomination. Some villagers scoff at these alien ideas, predicting that the newcomers will anger the earth goddess and meet a swift, divine punishment. But when no such punishment befalls them, curiosity morphs into cautious respect, and a handful of villagers begin to attend the Christian services. Among the early converts is Okonkwo's son Nwoi, still wrestling with the guilt and horror of Ikemefuna's death, and troubled by aspects of Igbo religion he cannot reconcile. Nwoi finds the Christian's message of brotherly love and the redemption of suffering deeply comforting. This is a pivotal moment in the novel. Nwoi's growing attachment to Christianity represents a direct challenge to Okonkwo's worldview. When Okonkwo learns of Nwoi's involvement, he explodes in rage, threatening violence and disowning him. Nwoi ultimately flees, finding refuge with the missionaries. The father-son bond fractures irrevocably, a wound that will fester and eventually contribute to Okonkwo's unraveling. Despite Okonkwo's fury, The Christian mission in Banta continues to expand. Though the villagers still largely uphold their traditional practices, a subtle shift has begun. The newcomers establish a church and even build a modest school and hospital. Bit by bit, the Christian community weaves itself into the fabric of daily life, offering new forms of social organization and suggesting that the Igbo deities lack power. This infiltration of a foreign religion and culture sets the stage for the larger confrontation looming on the horizon. After 7 years of exile, Okonkwo finally returns to Umuofia with plans to reassert his prominence. He envisions rebuilding his compound on a grander scale, taking more titles, and arranging advantageous marriages for his daughters to secure alliances. However, upon arriving, he discovers a village profoundly changed by the Christian presence. The once small church has grown, attracting not just outcasts and the disaffected, but also respected men seeking personal advantage or genuinely interested in the new faith. The missionaries are now led by a harsher figure named Reverend James Smith, who replaces the more accommodating Mr. Brown. Under Mr. Brown's earlier leadership, there was at least a semblance of negotiation between the new and old orders. But Reverend Smith preaches in stark absolutes, condemning Igbo gods as mere idols. Tensions flare. Okonkwo, who expected a triumphant homecoming, is greeted instead by the unsettling realization that his beloved Umuofia no longer fully resembles the place he left. Many of the clan's rules and taboos are openly challenged by converts who feel protected by the colonial administration that follows in the missionaries' wake. Okonkwo is furious that the clan has, in his eyes, grown soft, unwilling to expel or punish these foreigners who disrespect tradition. Okonkwo's frustration is further compounded when he sees how the colonial government, represented by court messengers and a district commissioner, has imposed new forms of law and order. Certain Igbo practices are now outlawed, and those who oppose the new regime risk fines or imprisonment. Okonkwo's old friend, Obiarika, shares in his disappointment, but warns that the white man's power is not just about religion. It's backed by guns, commerce, and a system of governance that exploits divisions within the clan. Okonkwo, impatient and seething with rage, begins pressing for direct action, violence if necessary, to restore Umuofia's independence and dignity. The more fervent Christian converts, emboldened by their new faith and the support of colonial authorities, grow bolder in challenging Igbo customs. One convert, Enoch, dramatically tears the mask off an Egwugwu during a sacred ceremony, an act tantamount to blasphemy. The Egwugwu are ancestral spirits represented by masked men chosen by the clan. To unmask an Egwugwu is to expose the mortal beneath the spirit, effectively killing the deity. The entire village is stunned, for this is an abomination that strikes at the spiritual heart of Igbo life. In retaliation, the Egwugwu and other outraged members of the clan burned the local Christian church to the ground. This is a critical moment where tensions between the old religion and the new faith flare openly. Okonkwo is thrilled by this act of retribution, interpreting it as a sign that the clan is finally demonstrating the unity and boldness he's been craving. But the Christian converts lodge a complaint with the colonial district commissioner, who immediately summons the village leaders, Okonkwo among them, to his headquarters under the guise of talking things over. There, the Igbo leaders are ambushed, handcuffed, and insulted. The district commissioner jails them and demands a heavy fine to secure their release. In prison, the men endure humiliation. Their heads are shaved, and they're mocked by court messengers. Upon hearing of this betrayal, the people of Umuofia gather the ransom money. Okonkwo simmers with a boiling fury that intensifies into hatred, not just for the white men, but for anyone who has allowed this to happen. After paying the fine, Okonkwo and the other leaders returned to Umuofia, seething with anger and shame. A village meeting is called at the marketplace, the historic site for communal decision-making. Okonkwo attends with a heightened sense of desperation. He's prepared to fight, kill, or die to restore what he sees as the clan's lost glory. As he stands before his people, there's a glimmer of hope that the gathered elders might agree to wage a final war against the invaders. Just then, court messengers arrive with orders to disband the meeting. With adrenaline coursing through him, Okonkwo doesn't hesitate. He decapitates the lead messenger with his machete, his entire being ablaze with a sense of righteous fury. But to his horror, no one from Umuofia joins in. The other messengers escape, and the villagers stand there, shocked and immobilized. In that frozen silence, Okonkwo realizes that the clan he has fought so hard to protect, or to dominate, has changed irrevocably. They will not follow him down the path of open rebellion. This revelation is the final blow to Okonkwo's spirit. He walks away from the crowd and disappears. When the district commissioner arrives later with armed men to apprehend him, they find that Okonkwo has taken his own life. He hangs himself on a tree behind his compound, an act considered a grave offense against the earth in Igbo belief. Okonkwo, the man who strove for perfection and feared failure above all else, dies by his own hand, an outcast from both the new order and the old tradition. The novel's central tension revolves around the collision of Igbo traditions with the forces of Western colonialism and Christian evangelism. Achebe meticulously details rituals, customs, and social hierarchies to portray a deeply rooted cultural system that is both structured and vulnerable. Okonkwo's tragic downfall illustrates how even the strongest individual cannot single-handedly stop the march of change when it's fueled by external powers and internal divisions. Okonkwo is haunted by the specter of his father's perceived weakness. His entire life becomes a drive to embody a hyper-masculine ideal, suppressing any emotional softness. The murder of Ikamafuna is the ultimate expression of this destructive mindset, as Okonkwo chooses appearing strong over natural paternal love. This rigidity eventually alienates him from his community and his own children, leaving him isolated when crisis hits. While Okonkwo fixates on personal achievement, Igbo society values communal harmony and familial connections. Characters like Uchendu underscore the importance of empathy and collective well-being. Okonkwo's failures are starkly framed against the clan's readiness to adapt or at least negotiate with new realities. His exile showcases how communal laws, both spiritual and judicial, transcend any individual status. Questions arise about whether Okonkwo's end is predestined by the gods or is the direct result of his personal choices. Igbo spiritual beliefs and the oracle's decrees appear to guide certain actions, yet Okonkwo's own impulsive decisions often compound his troubles. The tension between divine will and individual agency remains potent throughout the story. The arrival of missionaries and the colonial government exposes fractures within the clan. Some embrace new opportunities, others resist. Achebe is careful not to portray the Igbo as idyllic or the colonizers as purely evil. Instead, he shows how cultural upheaval arises from misunderstandings, power imbalances, and the willful imposition of foreign norms. The narrative becomes a larger reflection on how entire civilizations can fall apart under the weight of external conquest and internal discord. Okonkwo, His arc is defined by his rise to fame, his fear-driven actions, and ultimately, his tragic demise. From a local wrestling hero, he evolves into a figure of immense pride whose inability to adapt results in catastrophic outcomes for himself and those around him. Nwoi, Okonkwo's oldest son, initially seeks his father's approval, but grows disillusioned by violence and rigidity. His attraction to Christianity stems from a longing for compassion and a moral framework that condemns practices he finds abhorrent. Nwoi's conversion is a personal liberation, but also a familial betrayal in Okonkwo's eyes. Ikamafuna. Though only briefly in the story, Ikamafuna leaves a deep emotional impact. His death is a turning point for Okonkwo and Nwoi, symbolizing the dangerous extremes of a culture that can sanction violence in the name of tradition. Mr. Brown versus Reverend Smith. These two missionaries represent different faces of colonial Christianity. Mr. Brown attempts respectful dialogue with the Igbo, even if he remains paternalistic. Reverend Smith, in contrast, sees no compatibility between Christianity and local customs, escalating conflicts. Together, they show how different colonial attitudes can foster varying outcomes, for better or worse. Obiorika, often seen as the voice of reason and a counterpoint to Okonkwo's impulsive nature. Obiorika questions the morality of certain Igbo customs, like the killing of Ikamafuna, and also recognizes the unstoppable wave of colonial power. He laments the slow erosion of Igbo autonomy, but also criticizes rigid adherence to tradition. Marketplaces alive with barter and gossip, where women sell produce and men discuss clan affairs. Family compounds ringed by mud walls, with separate huts for each wife and her children, reflecting polygamous household structures. Ceremonial gatherings featuring drumming, dancing, wrestling contests, and the masked Igwogu processions that connect the living with ancestral spirits. Agricultural cycles governed by the planting and harvesting of yams, which are both staple food and a symbol of prosperity. These settings echo with the sounds of talking drums, the aroma of cooking soups thickened with palm oil, and the tension-filled hush during spiritual ceremonies. They also underscore the tight connection between daily life and religious belief. When colonial institutions arrive, courthouses, missionary schools, new architectural styles, they introduce stark visual and ideological contrasts that highlight the novel's central conflicts. Things Fall Apart is deeply charged with emotion, grief, anger, hope, and betrayal. Achebe's use of straightforward yet evocative language helps the reader, or in this case, the viewer of your summary, connect with the characters' internal struggles. Okonkwo's wrath and despair become palpable, especially after Ikamafuna's death and during his humiliating imprisonment by the district commissioner. Nwoi's quiet agony radiates whenever he's forced to witness violence or endure his father's disdain. Even the clan's collective heartbreak at the final turn of events, when they discover Okonkwo's body, carries a sense of mourning for a lost way of life. This emotional heft arises not just from personal tragedies, but from the broader cultural catastrophe unfolding. The Igbo, once confident in their spiritual and judicial structures, are now confronted with a worldview that labels their gods as false, their customs as barbaric, and their governance as inferior. Yet, Achebe never reduces the Igbo to passive victims. They make decisions, some wise, some fatal, that shape their own destiny. This complexity fosters empathy and challenges readers to see the story as a universal reflection on change, identity, and the high cost of inflexibility. The climax comes with Okonkwo's swift killing of the court messenger, a desperate bid to resurrect old values through violence. The moment he realizes the clan is not with him seals his fate. Retreating alone, he makes a final, irrevocable act by taking his own life, a deed that in Igbo belief disgraces both the individual and the earth goddess. The next day, when the district commissioner and his men find Okonkwo's body, they ask the villagers to cut him down. But Obiorika scathingly demands that the district commissioner do it himself, explaining that suicide is a taboo that forbids other villagers from handling the corpse. In a strikingly ironic final note, the district commissioner muses on how he might include a small paragraph about Okonkwo's story in his forthcoming book about the pacification of the tribes. This clinical, dismissive perspective contrasts sharply with the rich, tragic narrative we've just experienced, underscoring how colonial accounts often trivialized or misunderstood the complexities of African societies. Thus, Achebe ends the novel on a somber reflection, prompting the reader to question who gets to tell history and whose voice prevails when cultures collide. Since its publication in 1958, Things Fall Apart has become a classic text that challenges simplistic Western narratives of Africa as a homogeneous, primitive continent in need of civilization. Achebe demonstrates that the Igbo, and by extension other African societies, had their own intricate systems of governance, religion, commerce, and philosophy before colonial intervention. The tragedy lies not only in Okonkwo's personal failings, but also in the broader societal unraveling triggered by external forces that exploit existing rifts within the culture. The novel resonates far beyond its setting. Readers worldwide connect with its themes of identity, tradition, conflict, and the destructive effects of pride. Achebe invites contemplation on what happens when rigid adherence to custom encounters equally rigid forces of change, how communities might adapt peacefully or violently, or fail to adapt at all. For many, the figure of Okonkwo remains a cautionary archetype, illustrating how fear and inflexibility can doom even the strongest among us. In summarizing the entire scope of Things Fall Apart, we've walked through Okonkwo's rise and fall, witnessed how a cohesive society can be torn apart by both internal tensions and external pressures, and seen the moral complexities Achebe weaves into every scene. For a YouTube audience that might be encountering this story for the first time, the essence of the novel can be felt as both intensely personal. Okonkwo's tragedy, Nwoy's awakening, Ikemefuna's death, and expansively cultural, reflecting the dismantling of an entire way of life. If there is a singular takeaway, it's this: Things Fall Apart is not merely the story of an individual's downfall. It is a rich tapestry depicting how societies function, how they clash, and how they can crumble when their core values are undermined or too inflexible to respond to change. Achebe doesn't romanticize Igbo traditions. He's critical of certain practices, but he also vividly illustrates their depth and significance. Likewise, he doesn't shy away from presenting the destructive arrogance of the colonial project. The novel leaves us with both a lament for what was lost and a nuanced exploration of how communities negotiate identity amid overwhelming upheaval. Okonkwo's final act of suicide stands as a stark symbol. Unable to bend, he snaps under the weight of cultural transformation. The clan, too, stands at a precipice, divided, vulnerable, and uncertain of its own future. In many ways, that future is already being penned by the district commissioner, who sees everything through the lens of pacification. Achebe uses this bleak moment to underscore the importance of storytelling and historical memory. Whose narrative will survive? Whose voice will be heard? The novel's enduring power arises from its insistence on telling the Igbo side of the story, on giving a voice to those who otherwise might be relegated to a footnote in someone else's grand narrative of conquest. Thus ends our journey through Things Fall Apart. We've seen the relentless drumbeat of tradition, the warring hearts of fathers and sons, the unstoppable tide of foreign influence, and the fragility of pride. And perhaps, somewhere in the resonance of Achebe's final lines, we hear a plea for empathy and understanding across all cultures, lest we, too, stand by and watch things fall apart when confronted with the new and the unknown. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most iconic and influential novels of the 20th century, On the Road by Jack Kerouac. This book, first published in 1957, is often considered the defining work of the Beat generation, a group of writers and artists who, in the post-World War II era, rebelled against conventional society, seeking personal and creative freedom. On the Road captures that spirit perfectly. It follows the crisscrossing journeys of a young writer, Sal Paradise, Kerouac's fictional counterpart, and his charismatic friend, Dean Moriarty, as they roam the highways and small towns of mid-century America. In this comprehensive, spoiler-inclusive summary, we'll explore the novel's major plot points, delve into its central characters, unpack its themes, and immerse ourselves in the vibrant, restless atmosphere that Kerouac so powerfully evokes. By the end, you'll have a thorough understanding of everything this wild, vivid, and deeply emotional road trip has to offer. Our story begins from the perspective of Sal Paradise, the novel's narrator. He's a young writer living in New York City, recuperating from a recent divorce and facing a sense of existential drift. It's the late 1940s. America is still buzzing from its victory in World War II, but there's an undercurrent of restlessness and discontent among certain young intellectuals and artists. Sal feels this restlessness acutely. He yearns for some great adventure, some experience that will propel him beyond his ordinary routine and stale relationships. Enter Dean Moriarty, a figure who almost immediately captures Sal's imagination. Dean, newly arrived in New York, is brimming with energy. He grew up largely on the road, spending time in reform schools and around the West. He's reckless, charming, and exudes an undeniable magnetism. From Sal's eyes, Dean seems to embody a frantic kind of freedom, a hunger for life that matches the breathless pace of the jazz music they both love. Dean is also deeply curious, devouring books and philosophical ideas, yet unable to constrain himself to a single line of thought or conventional moral code. He is simultaneously childlike in his enthusiasm and cunning in his ability to manipulate situations to his advantage. Carlo Marx, another friend in New York, loosely based on poet Allen Ginsberg, enters the scene as well. Carlo's presence is significant because he and Dean share intense, marathon conversations about the meaning of life, poetry, and the nature of existence. These late-night sessions fascinate Sal, who listens to them passionately debate and sees in Dean a spark of mania that echoes something raw and untamed within himself. Sal, who's more introspective, is hypnotized by Dean's unpredictability. He finds himself drawn to Dean's dreams of crisscrossing the country, meeting new people, working odd jobs, and living spontaneously. Feeling an irresistible pull toward the open road, Sal finally decides to follow Dean's lead, or more accurately, to follow Dean's example, because Dean actually leaves for Denver first. Sal sets off on his own from New York in July 1947 with a few dollars in his pocket. His plan is grand and open-ended. He'll hitchhike west, see new landscapes, and eventually join Dean in Denver. This trip marks the beginning of Sal's transformation. Even from the start, it's clear that the road itself is the real protagonist. An ever-changing landscape that Sal can't quite pin down, but longs to absorb completely. Sal's initial trek west becomes a patchwork of tiny adventures and moments of existential reflection. He hitchhikes through New Jersey, struggling with rides at first, then getting into a series of trucks, meeting eccentric travelers, and bathing in the rawness of America's highways. He has very little money and often has to sleep on benches or in cheap motels. For Sal, each mile is laced with excitement. He meets migrant workers, ex-convicts, and colorful hitchhikers on the same route, each carrying their own stories and ambitions. This communal sense of drift, of shared restlessness, awakens something in Sal, a spiritual camaraderie among those who roam. Eventually, Sal makes it to Chicago, where he's fascinated by the city's dynamism and its jazz clubs. He enjoys the bustling nightlife, but remains haunted by the road that continues stretching out beyond the horizon. Soon he leaves for Des Moines, then finally on to Denver, where he reunites with Dean, Carlo Marx, and several other friends, including Chad King and Tim Gray. Denver becomes a sort of temporary home base for the group. By now, Dean has become involved with two women simultaneously, his new wife, Camille, and his teenage ex-wife, Mary Lou. This triangle sets the stage for much of the novel's emotional tension. Dean's chaotic personal life underscores his inability or unwillingness to be consistent or reliable. During this time in Denver, Sal revels in the circle of bohemian friends who debate poetry, play jazz records, and indulge in philosophical banter. Yet, he also feels moments of alienation when confronted with the unrelenting intensity of Dean's lifestyle. Dean is perpetually on the move. He'll rush from Carlo Marx's place to Mary Lou, then speed across town to see Camille, only to burst back again for more all-night discussions. Sal, both exhilarated and somewhat worn down, decides at one point to strike off on his own. He visits the mountains nearby, attempting to find some tranquility away from Dean's whirlwind. But the lure of Dean's energy and the vibrant Denver scene pulls him back. After some time in Denver, Sal, Dean, and Mary Lou plan to drive to San Francisco, hoping to find new possibilities. The trio's road trip is marked by comedic episodes: Dean's frantic driving, Mary Lou's flirtations with Sal, the group's near total lack of money, and more profound moments, like watching the sun rise over desert landscapes that seem to promise boundless freedom. Kerouac paints these vistas with reverence, emphasizing how the American West stirs an almost mystical awe in Sal's heart. Upon arriving in San Francisco, Sal is confronted with new realities. They move into a small apartment, but tensions run high. Dean's relationship with Mary Lou is fraught, and it becomes clear that Dean's reckless behavior often leaves him unmoored. Sal, too, is running out of money fast. Mary Lou eventually leaves both men for another traveler. Dean reconnects with Camille, with whom he has a child. Meanwhile, Sal grows disenchanted with city life. Disillusioned, broke, and feeling distant from Dean's ever more confusing entanglements, Sal decides to head back east on his own. Back on a bus to New York, Sal reflects on his journey. Though it was exhilarating, he returns exhausted, uncertain, and somewhat heartbroken, as though the road had promised something it couldn't fully deliver. In New York, he tries to settle into a more stable life. He stays with relatives in Long Island, works on his writing, and contemplates the possibility of returning to college. For a while, He recovers from the breakneck pace of his travels, remembering them fondly but also with a tinge of sadness. Yet Dean is never far from Sal's thoughts. Letters from Dean arrive sporadically, and each one is filled with chaotic energy. Dean is scrounging for work, forging new relationships, returning to old ones, and generally living on the edge of survival. Sal can't help but be pulled back into Dean's orbit. He's torn between a desire for stability and the persistent urge to embark on another great trek, this time, perhaps, better prepared or with clearer goals. Eventually, Dean reappears in New York unannounced, with Mary Lou once again by his side. He's dead set on convincing Sal to journey with him down to New Orleans and then out to the west once more. Although Sal initially hesitates, the allure of the road and the emotional, almost fraternal bond he feels with Dean wins out. Before long, they're off again, leaving behind the routines and constraints of New York for another shot at unbridled freedom. Their route takes them first to Virginia, where they drop by the family home of Sal's acquaintances, and then down to New Orleans to visit Old Bull Lee, a mentor figure of sorts, inspired by William S. Burroughs. Old Bull Lee is a sharp, cynical intellectual who experiments with drugs and looks upon Dean's perpetual motion with both amusement and concern. Through Old Bull Lee's commentary, we see a more critical perspective on Dean. While Sal idolizes Dean's spontaneity and thirst for life, Old Bull Lee sees recklessness, self-destructiveness, and manipulation. Nevertheless, Sal remains captivated, clinging to the belief that theirs. Leaving New Orleans, Sal and Dean continue their journey, traveling to places like Texas and then north again. At each stop, the two men drift into enclaves of fellow travelers, bohemians, bar patrons, and strangers who offer fleeting friendship or short-term comfort. The concept of a state of transcendent excitement and insight recurs throughout these jaunts. Dean, especially, believes that in certain moments, listening to a roaring saxophone solo at a packed jazz club or feeling the wind whip across the hood of a speeding car, he touches the pulse of life itself. These sections of the novel capture the essence of Sal's and Dean's nights out in jazz clubs, especially in places like Chicago, New York, or any city along the road that has a lively African-American music scene. Kerouac's prose crackles with energy as he describes their communion with the bebop rhythms and the intense improvisations that mirror Dean's own frantic, improvisational approach to living. For Sal, jazz resonates with the same spirit that pushes him onto the highway. It's spontaneous, it's raw, and it's always in motion. However, around every corner, real-world responsibilities lurk. Dean struggles to hold down jobs for more than a few days. He owes child support to Camille, has unresolved ties to Mary Lou, and is constantly low on cash. Sal, meanwhile, sometimes bristles at how Dean's impulsiveness can border on disregard for basic decency, such as abandoning friends who are depending on him or lying about finances. Yet Sal can't resist the sense that Dean is chasing an almost spiritual epiphany. In a country that's swiftly conforming to suburban ideals of marriage, steady jobs, and neat little houses, Dean stands out as a radical prophet of motion, desire, and personal freedom. The novel structure can feel cyclical. Sal and Dean keep separating and reuniting, taking new trips, encountering new sets of challenges, and returning to old patterns. Eventually, Dean arrives in New York once again, newly married to Inez, and the two make yet another attempt to drive cross-country. This time, though, the emotional stakes feel higher. Sal is becoming more introspective. He's not the same naive dreamer he was at the start. He's begun to see the cracks in Dean's persona, his unreliability, his tendency to burn through people's goodwill, and the pain he can inflict on the women who love him. Sal still admires Dean's vitality, but he's also more wary. While on one of these cross-country treks, Sal falls gravely ill in Denver. He experiences a severe fever that leaves him bedridden for days. Dean, preoccupied or perhaps unable to handle such a crisis, essentially abandons Sal in a boarding house, disappearing to chase his own impulses. When he finally returns, Sal is shaken. His trust in Dean is rattled, and he recognizes that Dean's worldview, it's all about the moment, man, can feel callous in the face of real need. Despite the fracture, once Sal recovers, they decide to continue west. Deep down, Sal still harbors hope that these journeys can yield some ultimate insight or revelation. Their travels bring them once more to San Francisco, then down to Los Angeles. And on a whim, Dean proposes the most outlandish idea yet, heading south of the border into Mexico, chasing an even more exotic vision of unfettered living. Sal, intrigued, agrees, feeling that maybe this foreign land, with its different rhythms and cultural landscapes, could offer the epiphany that has eluded them so far. Off they go, crossing into Mexico with little money, minimal plans, and an abiding optimism that something extraordinary awaits just beyond the next horizon. This Mexican odyssey marks the final major journey in the novel. Once they enter Mexico, Sal and Dean become enamored with the vast, sun-scorched panoramas, the small, dusty towns, and the unpaved roads that lead deeper into what they see as a mystical heart of the country. For them, Mexico is a place removed from the constraints of American society. No more highways dotted with chain restaurants or neon signs. Instead, there are small cantinas, lively fiestas, and a sense of timelessness. Sal, in particular, feels that Mexico represents a raw authenticity that might unite him and Dean with something greater than themselves. The pair pick up a young hitchhiker who guides them to his hometown, and they pass through villages where local children run after their car. They revel in cheap drinks and local marijuana, drifting through days and nights in a haze of excitement. Sal imagines they're on the brink of discovering life's deepest secrets. Yet as they plunge further into rural Mexico, reality, once again, intrudes. Road conditions worsen, their car breaks down, and Sal is stricken with a severe bout of dysentery that leaves him feverish and delirious. It's one of the novel's most pivotal emotional moments. Sal, physically and mentally shattered, needs Dean's help more than ever. But as Sal's sickness worsens, Dean abandons him, heading back to the United States. To some extent, Dean's departure is driven by his own urgent personal issues. He must attend to his complicated family situation back home. Yet in Sal's eyes, the betrayal is stark and final. All the illusions about Dean's absolute brotherhood and loyalty come crashing down. This is the critical turning point of Sal's emotional arc. The moment he realizes that the road, and the man who symbolizes it, cannot fully shield him from life's pain, mortality, and the responsibilities that come with genuine human connection. Sal recuperates in Mexico City with the help of locals and eventually makes his way back to the States alone. The dream of some grand spiritual epiphany in Mexico dissolves into the reality of Dean's limitations and Sal's vulnerability. Symbolically, the trip to Mexico stands as the culmination of their restless wanderings, a literal crossing of borders in search of transcendence, only to be met with physical and emotional collapse. Once back in the United States, Sal wrestles with a mix of heartbreak and acceptance. He recognizes that his friendship with Dean has changed forever. Though they will remain connected by the experiences they shared on the road, Sal cannot ignore the repeated betrayals and the emotional toll of Dean's lifestyle. Sal returns to New York and, for a while, attempts to settle into a calmer routine. He begins dating, nurtures new friendships, and continues writing, channeling the swirl of memories from his road adventures into reflective prose. Dean, meanwhile, wanders in and out of Sal's life. By the end of the novel, Dean shows up in New York one last time, hoping to reconnect and perhaps rekindle the old magic. However, Sal is preparing to go out for a night on the town with his girlfriend, to whom he will soon become engaged, and another couple. Sal, aware that Dean is on the outskirts, disheveled, possibly looking for a ride, makes the decision to go on without him. In that moment, we see the bittersweet closure to their era of shared wanderlust. The man who once ignited Sal's passion for the open road now seems like a distant figure from a bygone chapter. The final lines of the novel capture Sal reflecting on Dean and the roads they traveled, on the immensity of America, and on the ephemeral intensity of their bond. It's a gentle, wistful ending, tinged with nostalgia, but also colored by a sober understanding that real life cannot remain in constant motion. In a sense, Sal's choice to leave Dean behind at the end symbolizes his own steps toward a different kind of maturity, one that encompasses love, commitment, and personal responsibility alongside his memories of the blazing freedom he once found out on the road. Character analysis: the Beat Duo and their circle. Sal Paradise. Sal is the novel's narrator and our window into every event. He begins as a somewhat timid dreamer, recovering from a failed marriage, and ends with a deeper, more introspective perspective on life. While he idolizes Dean for his vitality, Sal's journey is also about reconciling the excitement of possibility with the necessity of stability and compassion. Over the course of the book, Sal matures, but he never fully abandons the romantic pull of the road. He embodies a classic tension in American literature, the individual torn between the call of exploration and the comfort of home. Dean Moriarty. Dean is the larger-than-life figure at the novel's center. Charismatic, impassioned, and unpredictable, he inspires both awe and frustration. His ceaseless quest for it, that elusive, heightened experience of life's immediacy, drives most of the novel's action. Yet, Dean's inability to take responsibility for those around him, especially the women in his life, illustrates the darker side of his free-spiritedness. By the novel's end, Dean stands as both an emblem of ultimate freedom and a tragic figure, someone whose brilliance is overshadowed by his incapacity to truly care for others in their moments of need. Carlo Marx. Carlo is the intellectual poet of the group, representing the more introspective aspects of the Beat generation. His late-night sessions with Dean shape the philosophical heart of the novel, discussions that revolve around time, existence, and the role of an artist in a disenchanted world. Carlo's observational, sometimes critical stance complements Sal's admiring perspective, providing a more analytical lens through which to view Dean's mania. Mary Lou and Camille. Mary Lou, Dean's teenage ex-wife, embodies the allure of youthful beauty and carefree living, but she quickly grows disillusioned with Dean's behavior. Despite moments of genuine affection, Dean's attention to her is fleeting and self-centered. Camille, the more stable and legitimate wife, anchors Dean's domestic life in San Francisco. She bears his child, deals with his absences, and endures his endless betrayals. Both women highlight Dean's conflicting desires for both conventional love and unrestrained freedom, and their pain is a sobering reminder of the costs of that freedom. Old Bully. In New Orleans, Old Bully acts as a detached commentator, an older figure who sees both the promise and peril in Dean's lifestyle. With his own eccentricities, including drug use and conspiratorial theories, he's hardly a paragon of normalcy, but he does voice concerns that resonate with Sal's growing doubts. In many ways, Old Bully shows Sal a roadmap for what a life of constant indulgence in impulses and vices might look like in the longer run. Intellectually rich, but also dangerously aimless. One of the overarching themes in On the Road is the search for freedom. Freedom from social conventions, from economic constraints, from psychological baggage, and from the stifling predictability of day-to-day life. Sal and Dean's repeated departures and arrivals epitomize this yearning. Yet, the novel also highlights the limitations of such freedom. Dean's chaotic personal life demonstrates that total freedom can harm others if it isn't balanced by empathy or responsibility. Another pivotal theme is the quest for identity. Sal narrates his own transformation from a passive observer to a more discerning individual who must decide how much of Dean's philosophy to adopt. This identity crisis plays out against the backdrop of America itself, which Kerouac describes as a vast patchwork of subcultures, landscapes, and social classes. The road trip becomes a metaphor for an existential journey. By traveling physically, Sal, and by extension, Kerouac, hopes to discover deeper truths about himself and his world. The concept of IT, which Dean constantly pursues, points to the spiritual or ecstatic dimension of beat culture. IT could be that moment of jazz improvisation that transcends ordinary perception, or the bonding that happens in the delirium of a night-long conversation, or the wordless communion with nature while speeding across the desert at dawn. This pursuit of heightened experience is central to Dean's character, but Sal ultimately realizes that these peaks can't be sustained indefinitely. Life, inevitably, demands rest, reflection, and human connections that run deeper than the next thrill. The physical backdrop of On the Road spans almost the entire United States, from the cramped apartments of New York City to the wide-open plains of the Midwest, the towering Rockies, and the buzzing streets of San Francisco. Through Sal's eyes, we witness a post-war America in flux. Highways connecting once isolated regions, cars becoming a symbol of modern freedom, and a booming economy that fosters both suburban comfort and an undercurrent of discontent among restless youth. Kerouac's descriptions of roadside diners, gas stations, Skid Row hotels, and jazz clubs evoke the era's atmosphere with cinematic clarity. He captures both the exhilaration of crossing a new state line and the grit of hustling for gas money. When Sal and Dean reach Mexico, the landscape shifts dramatically. The roads become less predictable, the language changes, and the cultural rhythms differ. This shift amplifies their sense of adventure, but also accelerates their confrontation with the harsh realities of physical ailment and resource scarcity. Throughout the novel, the road itself is the ultimate symbol, a thread connecting all these distinct places. It stands for possibility, for the promise that one can remake one's life by simply heading out in a new direction. Yet the road is also unforgiving, demanding resilience, cunning, and at times a willingness to compromise morals. It's a stage on which Sal and Dean enact their yearning for the extraordinary, but it's also a place that reveals their vulnerabilities. If there's one feeling that underscores On the Road, it's yearning for meaning, for connection, for adventure. Sal's narration brims with longing for the days of pure elation he experiences with Dean, cruising along empty highways or soaking in the electric energy of a jazz performance. There are moments when they share a profound unity, a bond that seems to transcend time. Those instances feel almost sacred to Sal, illuminating what it might be like to live purely in the moment. Over time, though, the novel transitions from naive excitement to a more melancholic undercurrent. The repeated disappointments, money problems, personal betrayals, physical illnesses, chip away at Sal's idealism. Dean's behavior, while initially inspiring, becomes a source of heartbreak. There's a powerful sense that the beat in Beat Generation refers not only to the beat of jazz rhythms, but also to a sense of being beaten down by life's inevitable burdens. In the final pages, the heartbreak is palpable. Sal's final note about Dean. Watching Dean recede into the distance, left alone in the streets, reflects a deep sadness at the dissolution of their once unbreakable camaraderie. Yet Kerouac tempers this sadness with a gentle acceptance, underscoring that life moves on, roads are never-ending, and each traveler must eventually find his own way. Hoff, published in 1957, On the Road was inspired by Jack Kerouac's real-life journeys in the late 1940s. The novel's impact on American culture was immediate and long-lasting. It resonated with a new generation of readers who found in Sal and Dean's escapades a reflection of their own disaffection with societal norms. The book helped define the Beat Generation alongside writers like Allen Ginsberg and William S. Burroughs, figures who appear in fictionalized form within the novel. Today, reading On the Road can feel like stepping into a mythic past. Gas was cheap, hitchhiking was feasible, and the highways promised a romantic encounter with the unknown. But its core message, about the tension between freedom and responsibility, the hunger for an authentic life, and the sometimes painful realities of forging deep human bonds, continues to resonate. In many ways, Sal's final acceptance of Dean's flaws marks the end of a great adventure and the beginning of a more nuanced understanding of freedom. For modern readers, or viewers in this case, the novel reminds us that the open road symbolizes more than physical travel. It represents the courage to explore our deepest desires and confront the limitations that make us human. Kerouac's prose, rich with spontaneous energy, conjures a living tapestry of mid-century America, a land of neon signs, dusty truck stops, all-night jazz joints, and restless souls seeking something just beyond the horizon. In summarizing On the Road, we've traced Sal Paradise's transformation from an eager dreamer to a somewhat chastened observer, aware that the road's allure is inseparable from the heartbreak it can inflict. We've come to see Dean Moriarty as both muse and cautionary tale, an embodiment of raw, incandescent life who nonetheless falters when real empathy is required. We've glimpsed a cast of beats: Carlo Marx, Old Bull Lee, Mary Lou, and Camille, who form a shifting constellation around Sal and Dean's star-like momentum, each contributing their own perspective on what it means to reject convention and pursue truth in a rapidly changing world. Ultimately, On the Road is a celebration of motion, discovery, and the quest for transcendent moments. Yet it's also a sobering narrative about the costs of unbounded freedom. By the closing chapters, Sal Paradise has learned that the euphoria of the open highway can't last forever, that it must be balanced by the responsibilities and emotional ties that make life meaningful. The final image of Dean drifting away in the darkness, while Sal heads off with his new companions, crystallizes the bittersweet passage from youth into a maturity tempered by memory. Kerouac's final lines, meditating on America's vast landscape and the shared dreams of its drifters, offer a parting reflection on what it means to be alive, longing, and perpetually in motion. And there you have it, the full arc of On the Road. Sal Paradise's repeated journeys west and south, the kaleidoscope of strangers and friends encountered, the jazz and poetry that color the nights, and the inner growth spurred by both wonder and disappointment. If you've never read the novel, now you have the entire story, including its ending. But if you do decide to experience Kerouac's text firsthand, you'll discover a lyrical style that pulses with the same restless heartbeat as its characters. For many readers, the book is more than just a story. It's an anthem for wanderers, a testament to the spiritual possibilities of a life unconfined. Yet it's also a cautionary tale, reminding us that in the pursuit of absolute liberty, one might risk losing track of the very human connections that make that freedom worthwhile. Either way, On the Road remains a defining literary journey, one that continues to inspire, provoke, and challenge anyone who has ever looked down a long highway at dusk and wondered where it might lead. Safe travels, and thanks for joining me on this deep dive into one of literature's most exhilarating road trips. Tess of the D'Urberville is one of Thomas Hardy's most renowned and controversial novels, first published in 1891. It tells the tragic story of a young woman named Tess D'Urberville, who, through a combination of fate, personal decisions, and societal constraints, experiences a life marked by profound injustices, passionate love, and ultimate sacrifice. In many ways, the novel is a critique of Victorian society's moral judgments and rigid social codes, which significantly shaped Tess's destiny. The following is a comprehensive, spoiler-inclusive summary designed to give you a vivid sense of the plot, characters, themes, and emotional resonance of the story from beginning to end. Our story begins in the fictional village of Marlott, located in Hardy's mythical county of Wessex, which closely resembles certain regions of rural southwest England in the late 19th century. John D'Urberville, Tess's father, is strolling home one evening when he is stopped by the local parson. The parson casually reveals that John is a descendant of the once noble D'Urberville family, now fallen from prominence. John, who is a bit prone to flights of fancy and fits of pride, is instantly filled with grandiose visions of wealth, prestige, and ancient lineage. He imagines how this revelation could transform his family's humble life. Tess D'Urberville, the eldest daughter of John and Joan D'Urberville, is at this time only a teenager, beautiful, hardworking, and aware of her family's precarious financial situation. She helps with chores, looks after her younger siblings, and does her best to maintain an orderly household despite her parents' somewhat imprudent tendencies. Her father's newfound obsession with the D'Urberville ancestry quickly places Tess in a precarious situation. Her mother, Joan, devises a plan to capitalize on the lineage by sending Tess to claim kin with the wealthy Stoke D'Urbervilles in a nearby region. The D'Urbervilles reason that if these Stoke D'Urbervilles are in fact relatives, they might help Tess and her family financially or otherwise. Though Tess feels uneasy about the plan, her shyness and sense of propriety making her reluctant. She is eventually persuaded to approach them, spurred by guilt over a recent family mishap involving her father's drunkenness and the accidental death of the family horse, Prince. With the horse gone, the family is even more desperate for help. Tess's arrival at the Stoke D'Urberville estate represents her first major departure from the comfortable yet impoverished world of Marlott. The estate itself is lavishly maintained, though Tess quickly discovers that these Stoke D'Urbervilles are not, in fact, the ancient lineage that her father imagines. Rather, they have purchased the D'Urberville name for the sake of social prestige. The estate's matriarch, Mrs. Stoke D'Urberville, an eccentric widow with faltering eyesight and a fondness for birds, shows little genuine concern for any supposed family connection. It seems mostly a formality. It is here that Tess meets the widow's son, Alec d'Urberville, an arrogant, self-indulgent young man who takes an immediate interest in Tess's beauty and innocence. Alec promises Tess employment at the estate, where she will tend the poultry and help his mother with various domestic tasks. Although Tess is uneasy about Alec's flirtatious advances, the lure of supporting her family financially convinces her to stay. Over the days and weeks that follow, Tess becomes increasingly uncomfortable with Alec's attempts to seduce her. He showers her with compliments, sly innuendos, and sometimes unwanted physical closeness. Tess, being a naive and morally upright young woman, tries to maintain boundaries. Yet she also finds herself conflicted. Her main objective is to earn enough money to help her family, and leaving might mean forsaking her duty. Alec's manipulations, combined with Tess's sense of obligation and her vulnerability in an unfamiliar environment, create a dangerous dynamic that foreshadows tragedy. One of the most pivotal and controversial incidents in the novel occurs after a local fair. Tess, feeling out of place and wanting to return home, accepts Alec's insistence on taking her back. She hopes to avoid further entanglement, but remains anxious about his intentions. On the journey, night falls, and Alec, guiding his horse through the winding roads of an ancient forest known as the Chase, becomes more forceful in his advances. Under the cover of darkness, Tess's resistance is overpowered, and she is left at Alec's mercy. Thomas Hardy leaves the exact nature of the events somewhat ambiguous, though modern interpretations largely view it as sexual assault or rape rather than a consensual encounter. The result is that Tess's innocence is effectively taken from her, initiating a tragic chain of events. The difference between Tess's moral standing and Victorian society's judgments about her purity soon come into devastating conflict. Hardy emphasizes the harsh, almost fated quality of this episode by painting the scene as primal and wild, with the ancient forest seeming to bear witness to the violation. In the aftermath, Tess is filled with guilt, shame, and confusion. She quietly leaves the Stoke d'Urberville estate as soon as possible, determined never to return. Her internal struggle becomes a central theme. Tess blames herself, wonders what she could have done differently, and fears society's condemnation should her disgrace become common knowledge. The readers, meanwhile, are given a window into a profound injustice, one that society, and even Tess herself, cannot fully comprehend. Back in Marlott, Tess attempts to resume a normal life, but soon discovers she is pregnant with Alec's child. Her parents have mixed reactions. They still harbor dreams of social elevation, but are dismayed by their daughter's ruin. Tess, meanwhile, nurses a quiet sense of resignation. She decides to give birth to the child in as much secrecy as possible, fearful of the shame that would be cast upon her and her family. She does have the baby, a boy she names Sorrow. In a heartbreaking turn, the infant becomes gravely ill. Tess, deeply religious in her own way, is distressed that her baby might die unbaptized. In a haunting nighttime scene, Tess baptizes Sorrow herself, performing the ritual in the presence of her younger siblings. The event highlights her desperate need for some measure of spiritual reassurance, as well as her deep maternal love. Despite her efforts, the baby soon dies, and Tess arranges a humble burial in a corner of the churchyard, far from the officially consecrated plots. This episode is both profoundly tragic and revealing of societal hypocrisy. The vicar, initially reluctant to provide a Christian burial for a child deemed illegitimate, offers only a grudging allowance, reflecting how unyielding institutions can be toward a mother like Tess. From that point, Tess is determined to leave Marlott, seeking work elsewhere in order to escape local gossip and the ever-present reminders of her ordeal. She yearns for a fresh start, some place where her history will not follow her so heavily. Hardy underscores Tess's inner conflict by describing the farmland, roads, and countryside as both liberating and oppressive. They offer a sense of peace and renewal, yet they cannot wholly erase the trauma or the social stigma she carries. One of the most hopeful chapters of Tess's life unfolds at Talbot Hayes Dairy. Seeking a clean slate and honest employment, Tess begins working there as a dairymaid. The pastoral setting of Talbot Hayes is almost Edenic in its lushness and beauty, a stark contrast to the darkness of the chase. Here, Tess's fortunes momentarily brighten, and she embraces the simpler rhythms of rural labor, milking cows and forging friendships with her fellow dairymaids. Talbot Hayes stands as a respite in her journey, a space where she is somewhat free from the prying eyes and harsh judgments of Marlott. It is at Talbot Hayes that Tess meets Angel Clare, a handsome, introspective man who is learning the art of dairying for philosophical and personal reasons. Angel is the son of a clergyman, but he has carved his own spiritual path, distinct from the strict religious doctrines of his father. He is drawn to the natural world, appreciating its beauty and organic rhythms. Angel notices Tess almost immediately, and there is a quiet electricity between them. Tess, for her part, is captivated by Angel's gentleness, intellectual curiosity, and seeming openness of mind. Over time, their acquaintance grows into a deep bond. Tess cherishes Angel's kindness and attention, but also battles an internal sense of unworthiness. She fears that Angel, so seemingly pure of heart, would reject her if he knew of her past with Alec and the birth and death of Sorrow. Angel, meanwhile, idealizes Tess as a pure country girl, untainted by the corruptions of society. This idealization, though flattering on one level, sows the seeds of potential conflict. While Angel sees Tess as the embodiment of natural innocence, Tess knows the reality is much more complicated. As the seasons pass at Talbot Hayes, Angel and Tess's feelings intensify, culminating in Angel proposing marriage. Tess is at once elated and deeply afraid. She truly loves Angel, but her guilt and anxiety about her past loom large. Recalling her mother's advice, Tess tries to delay, believing it might be best to confess her secret before taking vows. At the same time, she fears losing Angel's love if she reveals the truth too soon. Eventually, Angel's ardor and Tess's own hope for happiness overcome her reservations. She consents to marry him. The pair plan a simple wedding, and Tess writes multiple letters attempting to confess her history. Tragically, one of these letters, placed under Angel's door, ends up lodged beneath the carpet where he never sees it. Tess interprets his lack of reaction as acceptance, which grants her a mistaken sense of security. Only on the eve of the wedding does she make a final attempt to openly speak her truth, but circumstances prevent Angel from fully listening. Hardy skillfully ratchets up the tension here, leaving readers uneasy as Tess heads into her wedding day, carrying a burden of untold secrets. The wedding itself is brief but joyous on the surface. The newlyweds retreat to an old cottage once used by Angel's parents as a wedding gift. There, brimming with romantic optimism, Angel confesses a past indiscretion of his own, a short-lived affair in London, seeking Tess's forgiveness. Tess, relieved that he is willing to share his failings, believes this is her moment to make a similar confession. She carefully recounts her own story, her involvement with Alec, the baby's birth, and the subsequent tragedy. She fully expects Angel's compassionate understanding, akin to what she just extended to him. However, the effect of Tess's confession on Angel is shattering. Despite his progressive talk and seemingly broad-minded philosophies, Angel is very much a product of his time in certain respects. He experiences her revelation as a profound betrayal of his idealized vision of Tess. In a dramatic emotional pivot, Angel cannot reconcile the Tess he adores with the reality of her past. His love for her, tinged with moral rigidity and romantic illusions, wavers under the weight of her confession. Tess, for her part, pleads for understanding, highlighting the injustice that men like Angel can be forgiven for sexual misdeeds, while women are far more harshly judged. A tense, painful night ensues, with Angel almost sleepwalking in a daze. He even mutters delusional remarks, indicating he feels Tess is dead, and lifts her out of bed, carrying her through the garden in a trance-like state. His actions reveal the deep turmoil raging in his subconscious. When morning comes, Angel proposes a temporary separation. He rationalizes that they need time to think, and he decides to travel to Brazil to try his hand at farming, leaving Tess in England. Tess is devastated. She begs Angel to reconsider or to at least allow her to accompany him. But he remains resolute, entrusting her with some money and instructing her not to follow him. In a sequence emblematic of Victorian double standards, Angel lauds the idea of a chaste woman while failing to grasp the cruelty of rejecting Tess based on circumstances beyond her control. Tess departs, her hopes for marital bliss shattered. She returns to her family briefly and tries to maintain composure, all the while harboring the faint hope that Angel might one day come back to her, softened. Desperate for work and eager not to be a financial burden on her impoverished family, Tess takes on grueling labor at a place called Flintcomash Farm. The environment here could not be more different from Talbot Hayes. Flintcomash is barren, muddy, and harsh, symbolic of Tess's emotional state and the realities of rural impoverishment. She endures backbreaking tasks, such as Swede hacking in the cold, slush-filled fields. The foreman is unsympathetic, and the overall atmosphere is cruel and punishing. During her time at Flintcomash, Tess briefly encounters old acquaintances, including Marion, one of her fellow dairymaids from Talbot Hayes, who similarly fell on hard times. While these small connections offer some solace, Tess continues to struggle mightily. Angel's abandonment weighs on her heavily, and she oscillates between hope and despair. Every rumor or whisper of news about Angel leaves her raw with longing. Meanwhile, the specter of Alec d'Urberville reappears in her life in a manner that cements the relentless nature of Tess's fate. While toiling at Flintcomash, Tess once again crosses paths with Alec d'Urberville, now apparently reformed. After Tess's departure years ago, Alec had a religious conversion under the influence of Angel's father, the Reverend Clare. When Tess encounters Alec preaching in an outdoor setting, she is astonished by his change in demeanor and his fervent religiosity. However, the transformation proves superficial. Despite his outward piety, Alec's obsession with Tess resurfaces almost immediately, suggesting that his deeper impulses remain intact. Alec implores Tess to avoid tempting him away from his newfound spiritual path. Yet at the same time, he persists in pressuring her to accept his protection and companionship. He offers to rescue her from her dire financial situation, reminding Tess that her family is in constant need. Tess's sense of moral horror is overwhelming. She wants nothing to do with Alec, yet her family's poverty, coupled with Angel's continuing absence, chips away at her resistance. Over multiple encounters, Alec intensifies his pursuit. He leverages Tess's precarious condition, promising her mother and sibling security if Tess will only consent to be with him. Tess, proud yet worn down by exhaustion and heartbreak, tries repeatedly to reject him. In a moment of desperation, Tess writes to Angel, begging him to return and save her from this downward spiral. Angel, however, remains unresponsive in Brazil, where he is struggling with misfortunes of his own and still grappling with his ambivalence toward Tess. Tess's final capitulation to Alec is the result of layered pressures. Her family is facing eviction, her siblings are hungry, and she is emotionally destitute. Alec capitalizes on these vulnerabilities. With Angel absent, no visible means to support her loved ones, and the unrelenting stigma of her past, Tess feels she has no choice but to accept Alec's financial and material help. Though it is left ambiguous whether Tess becomes his mistress or common-law wife, the arrangement signifies a heartbreaking moral defeat for Tess. She had dreamed of a life of genuine love and honesty with Angel, only to find herself dependent on the very man who first wronged her. It is during this bleak chapter that Hardy underscores society's hypocrisy once more. A woman like Tess, burdened by scandal, faces limited means of survival, often forced in a situation she would never choose under fairer conditions. Tess's spirit begins to wither under the weight of this compromise. She feels trapped, sorrowful, and resentful. Whenever she allows herself to think of Angel, a wave of grief sweeps over her, recalling her last glimpse of him and the shattered illusions of their wedded bliss. At long last, Angel Clare does return to England, having suffered illness and misfortune in Brazil. His experiences abroad have matured him and softened his views. Realizing he may have been unjust, Angel searches for Tess, determined to beg forgiveness and rekindle their marriage on more equitable terms. He visits Marlot, only to discover that Tess no longer resides there. Clues lead him to the place near Alec's new residence, and he finally locates Tess in a boarding house that Alec has provided for her family. The reunion is fraught with tension and heartbreak. Initially, Tess is overwhelmed with relief and joy at Angel's reappearance, her deepest unspoken wish. However, this joy quickly sours as she recalls her current entanglement. She accuses Angel of coming too late, pointing to the presence of Alec in her life. In a moment of raw despair, Tess blames Angel for abandoning her, lamenting that, had he stayed or returned sooner, her fate might have been different. The emotional turmoil ignites a tragic series of events. In a powerful scene at an inn, Tess and Angel have an anguished exchange. Angel attempts to atone for his prior moral rigidity, expressing genuine remorse and longing for a fresh start. But Tess feels that the damage is already done. Alec's incessant presence has corroded the possibility of returning to her ideal of life with Angel. She is torn between love and resentment, between longing and shame. Angel begs her forgiveness and wishes to reclaim her, but Tess cannot simply undo the arrangement she made with Alec to keep her family from starvation. This confrontation culminates in a moment of fatal resolution. Tess, spurred by a wave of anger and desperation, kills Alec. The murder takes place offstage, as Hardy often keeps violent details implicit, but it is clear that Tess has stabbed Alec in a fit of pent-up anguish. In that single, impulsive act, she severs the oppressive tie that has haunted her for years. Yet Tess is immediately aware of the gravity of her crime and the hopelessness of her situation. After killing Alec, Tess flees to find Angel. Shocked by her action, Angel nonetheless stands by her, driven by remorse and a deep-seated love that has now come to the fore. The two embark on a desperate attempt to evade the authorities. They travel on foot, seeking remote hiding places in the countryside. During these fleeting days, Tess experiences a brief spell of near-ecstatic happiness, as though liberated from all the forces that have tormented her: shame, fear, exploitation. She basks in Angel's presence, cherishing these stolen moments, even though both know the end cannot be far off. Their wanderings bring them to Stonehenge, the ancient prehistoric monument that looms in the English landscape as a relic of a distant past. In a haunting night scene, Tess lies down to rest among the massive stones, which Hardy imbues with an air of timelessness and pagan solemnity. As dawn breaks, Tess accepts the reality that she cannot elude the law forever. She implores Angel to look after her younger sister, Liza Lou, once Tess is gone. This request underscores Tess's sacrificial nature. She hopes that her sister might have a chance at the happiness denied to her. When the sun rises, the police arrive. Tess, psychologically spent and oddly serene, offers little resistance. Angel stands by in despair as Tess is arrested for Alec's murder, setting the stage for the novel's final, tragic denouement. Tess is tried, found guilty, and condemned to death. Hardy spares the reader from the detailed legal proceedings, focusing instead on the emotional resonance. During her final days, Tess faces her fate with a calm stoicism, resigned to the harsh justice of the society that has failed to protect her from predatory forces and punishes her for a desperate act. Angel, deeply remorseful, can do nothing but await the inevitable outcome, reflecting on the role he played in Tess's downfall. In the novel's poignant last scene, Angel and Tess's younger sister, Liza Lou, are seen on a hillside near the prison. A black flag is hoisted, signaling Tess's execution has been carried out. Hardy closes the novel on this somber note, with Angel and Liza Lou walking away together, the slight hint of a future bond implied. It is Tess's final wish that they unite, symbolizing a transfer of hope from Tess to her beloved sister. The image of the black flag, waving against the sky, lingers as a testament to the tragic inexorability of Tess's fate. Tess Derbyfield. At the center of the novel is Tess, portrayed by Hardy as a figure of natural grace and innate purity. Despite Victorian society's labeling her as fallen, Hardy insists on her essential virtue, underscoring that her downfall stems from external forces: Alec's predatory behavior, Angel's moral rigidity, and the crushing weight of poverty and social stigma. Throughout the book, Tess's character deepens from a naive country girl to a woman hardened by betrayal and forced to commit an extreme act in a moment of desperation. Her plight highlights the inherent injustice of social and gender double standards. Angel Clare. Angel is Tess's shining hope, the man who seems to embody open-mindedness and love. However, his internal struggle between his liberal philosophies and ingrained Victorian moral codes leads him to desert Tess at her time of greatest need. His evolution is one of tragic self-realization. Only after facing misfortune in Brazil does he come to understand his hypocrisy and the cruelty of the double standard he applied. By the time he seeks reconciliation, circumstances have spiraled beyond repair. Alec d'Urberville. Alec is the story's most overt antagonist, a man who uses wealth, social standing, and cunning to take advantage of Tess. He oscillates between superficial religious conversions and obsessive, predatory desires. While Hardy allows small glimpses of Alec's possible contrition, he predominantly represents the external force that dooms Tess, first through sexual violence and later through manipulative schemes. His murder at Tess's hands signals her final break from the oppression he represents. John and Joan Durbeyfield. Tess's parents embody a folksy, somewhat irresponsible worldview. John, in particular, is easily swayed by the revelation of noble ancestry and leans on Tess to find them fortune. Joan often schemes about Tess's future, urging her daughter into situations that ultimately harm her. Despite their flaws, Hardy portrays them as products of their environment, limited by poverty and social aspirations. Liza Lou Durbeyfield. Though a minor character, Liza Lou becomes a crucial figure in Tess's final wish. She stands as a younger, presumably more innocent version of Tess, carrying the potential for a simpler, untroubled life, if Angel heeds Tess's dying request to protect her. The injustice of social morality. A dominant theme is Hardy's critique of Victorian attitudes regarding female sexuality and purity. Tess, a victim of Alec's sexual aggression, is labeled by society, and partially by Angel, as impure, highlighting a stark double standard. Tess's subsequent struggles reveal how narrow moral codes push vulnerable women into desperate circumstances. Fate versus free will. The novel poses questions about the role of destiny. From the moment Tess's father learns of their D'Urberville lineage to the tragic events at the chase, Hardy weaves a sense that Tess is prey to forces beyond her control: chance encounters, family pressures, and social judgments. Yet at times, Tess's own choices, such as not fully confessing to Angel before the wedding, also shape her fate. The tension between external determinism and personal agency remains a central motif. Nature and pagan elements. Hardy's depictions of the rural countryside, from the idyllic fields of Talbot to the stark plains of Flintcomash, are not merely backdrops. They mirror Tess's emotional states and underscore the novel's naturalistic tone. The pagan undertones, symbolized in places like the Chase and Stonehenge, contrast with the rigidity of Christian dogma in Victorian England. Tess's suffering often seems intertwined with ancient forces, suggesting a cosmic dimension to her tragedy. Hypocrisy and double standards. Through Angel's reaction to Tess's past and the church's refusal to bury her baby in consecrated ground, Hardy critiques institutionalized hypocrisy. Men's sexual transgressions are largely forgiven, while women suffer severe consequences for any perceived lapse. Alec's superficial religious conversion, too, underscores the hollowness of much of society's moral posturing. Class and ancestry. The irony of the D'Urberville name, purchased by Alec's upstart family, contrasts with Tess's authentic but impoverished lineage. Hardy highlights how social mobility and respect are more about wealth and appearances than true heritage or personal merit. Tess's father, John, is preoccupied with the prestige of being a D'Urberville, an obsession that partially leads Tess into harm's way. Throughout Tess of the D'Urberville, the reader is drawn into Tess's emotional world, her hopes, anxieties, and heartbreaks. Hardy's writing style, replete with evocative descriptions of the English countryside, immerses us in a setting where the beauty of nature often contrasts sharply with the cruelty of social conventions. The novel invites a deep empathy for Tess, who strives to do right in a society that denies her fair treatment. She is celebrated for her resilience, yet it is precisely her stoic endurance that ultimately leads her to the final, desperate act of killing Alec. Hardy was writing at a time when such themes were considered scandalous. The novel's frank depiction of sexuality, especially Tess's violation and the resulting child, shocked many Victorian readers. Critics attacked Hardy for challenging the moral codes of the day, forcing him to modify certain passages in early editions. Nevertheless, The work endures because of its striking portrayal of a young woman trapped by a confluence of moral, social, and economic factors. One of the novel's most poignant aspects is its portrayal of love, a love that, in Tess's case, remains unconditional even in the face of Angel's betrayal and Alex's exploitative behavior. Tess's final dream is that her sister, Liza Lou, might have a happier future. In this sense, Hardy ends on a note that, while not hopeful for Tess, leaves open the possibility of a more compassionate world for subsequent generations. It also underscores the cyclical nature of rural life. As one figure is lost, another may blossom, but only if lessons are learned. Even in modern times, Tess of the D'Urberville resonates powerfully. Questions of consent, victim blaming, and societal judgment remain sadly relevant. The novel's emphasis on the harsh realities faced by women who are shunned for circumstances beyond their control still strikes a chord. The story also highlights how easily love can be tainted by rigid expectations and illusions of purity. Angel Claire's transformation, though incomplete, reflects the necessity of growth beyond ingrained norms. Moreover, the novel's richly drawn settings illustrate Hardy's deep connection to rural England. From Marlot's vibrant greenery to Flintcomash's bleak fields, the landscape is as much a character as Tess herself. Such vivid depictions remind us how environment and social structure shape personal destiny. Hardy's Wessex, both real and symbolic, remains a monumental achievement in literary regionalism, capturing not just a place, but the spirit and struggles of its inhabitants. Perhaps the novel's greatest triumph is its refusal to fit neatly into a typical morality tale. Tess is neither the saintly maiden nor the sinful seductress that Victorian paradigms might force her to be. Instead, she is a nuanced human being, flawed like any of us, yet overwhelmingly wronged by the very systems that claim moral authority. Her story is at once heartrending and enlightening. By fully revealing Tess's inner life and the extenuating circumstances of her actions, Hardy compels readers to re-evaluate prejudiced social norms and to empathize with those labeled as fallen. In summation, Tess of the D'Urberville presents a sweeping, deeply emotional narrative of one young woman's struggles against the cruel constraints of her time. Tess D'Urberville begins her journey as a dutiful daughter trying to help her family. Yet a series of fateful encounters and societal pressures lead her down a path fraught with tragedy. From her initial violation by Alec D'Urberville to her brief ecstasy of love with Angel Claire, Tess's life is a tapestry of pain, desire, resilience, and ultimate sacrifice. Hardy weaves each aspect, character, setting, moral conflict, into a rich, layered commentary on Victorian hypocrisy and the relentless toll taken on women who dare to live outside social norms. The book's climactic turning points, Tess's confession to Angel, his departure to Brazil, her desperate acceptance of Alec's support, and finally Alec's murder, lay bare the extremes of human emotion: love, jealousy, despair, and retribution. Through it all, Tess's inherent dignity remains central. She may be undone by events largely beyond her control, but her moral stature and capacity for love shine through, even as she faces the final judgment of a pitiless society. The haunting image of the black flag marking Tess's execution closes the novel on a note of stark finality. Yet the sight of Angel and Liza Lou walking away together offers a subtle glimmer of continuity and hope. In urging Angel to marry her sister, Tess acts as a tragic mediator between the old and new, delivering a fragile possibility that future generations might transcend the injustices she endured. Ultimately, Tess of the D'Urberville stands as one of Thomas Hardy's crowning achievements, a testament to his skill in blending realism with lyricism, social criticism with empathetic storytelling. It remains enduringly relevant for readers who grapple with questions of justice, identity, and the moral complexities of love and duty. Tess's heartbreaking journey continues to move hearts and spark debate, reminding us that empathy and understanding are vital correctives to the destructive forces of shame and judgment. By immersing ourselves in Tess's story, we bear witness to a life shaped by faith, fueled by resilience, and concluded by a final act that both condemns and redeems her in the eyes of those who truly see her. This is the power and poignancy of Tess of the D'Urberville, an unforgettable chronicle of innocence, betrayal, and endurance that compels us to question the social mores we take for granted. Hardy's masterpiece endures not merely as a tragic romance, but also as an exposé of the cruelties ingrained in society's moral frameworks. It is a novel that rewards careful reading, inviting audiences to reflect on compassion and the very nature of justice. And while Tess's journey ends in darkness, her emotional strength and unquenchable spirit leave a lasting illumination, reminding us that, even in a harsh world, humanity and empathy can yet survive. Brace yourselves for a journey into the deep heart of one of America's most monumental literary tragedies, a swirling saga of ambition, betrayal, forbidden love, and the unforgiving weight of history. With the precision of a master craftsman and the stormy thunder of biblical forewarning, William Faulkner conjures a world both majestic and doomed, a world that refuses to let its characters, or its readers, escape unscathed. This is Absalom, a novel that stands as both a testament to and a condemnation of the illusions that once forged and destroyed an entire generation in the Old South. Prepare to be transported to Yoknapatawpha County, Mississippi, where one man's grand design tests the boundaries of morality, race, and legacy. We will cross thresholds into shadowy halls, glimpse battles waged in the fiery crucible of the Civil War, and witness the unstoppable collapse of a proud empire built on secrets and a desperate lust for social transcendence. In this sweeping epic retelling, we follow the life and legacy of Thomas Sutpen, a haunted figure whose iron will collide with the brutal realities of class, race, and family scandal. By the end, the colossal pillars of Sutpen's 100 will lie in smoldering ruins, leaving us to reckon with the ashes of dream and destiny. Gather your courage and your curiosity. The story of Absalom awaits, pulling us into its labyrinth of guilt, heritage, and the tragedy that can arise when a single man's obsessive ambition dares to challenge both God and society. Absalom is anchored in Faulkner's fictional Yoknapatawpha County, Mississippi, stretching across time from before the Civil War into the early 20th century. At its center stands the mighty but accursed Sutpen family, whose patriarch, Thomas Sutpen, erects a grand plantation home called Sutpen's 100. Faulkner's tapestry weaves themes of slavery, heritage, and the heavy burden of Southern aristocratic pride, all culminating in a searing tragedy. Although Faulkner originally presents the narrative through multiple narrators in a fragmented, non-chronological structure, we will lay out this spoiler-inclusive summary in a clearer, chronological flow to help you fully absorb every dramatic turn. It is a story as deeply rooted in biblical overtones as it is in the tangible soil of the American South. The title Absalom references the biblical story of King David's son who rebelled and was ultimately destroyed, an ominous prelude to the Sutpen family's fate. Thomas Sutpen's beginnings are shrouded in rural poverty in the early 19th century. Growing up in the backcountry, he experiences a defining moment of humiliation that alters the course of his life. Turned away by a black servant from a wealthy man's front door, he realizes that social standing, anchored by land, enslavement, and power, is the key to being treated with respect. From that day forward, he obsessively devotes himself to a grand design, to acquire wealth, status, and a legitimate lineage that no one can deny. Drifting to the West Indies, likely Haiti, as a young man, he amasses a mysterious fortune and marries a local woman. After fathering a child with her, he makes a horrifying discovery. She has partial black ancestry. According to the racist logic of his era, Thomas Sutpen believes this disqualifies her from being part of his pure Southern lineage. He brutally discards both wife and child, committing an act that will cast a long shadow over the rest of his life. His rejection of his first family becomes the catalyst of a secret that dooms his ambitious enterprise. In 1833, with gold obtained in the Caribbean, Sutpen purchases 100 square miles of land in Jefferson, Mississippi, and christens it Sutpen's 100. The locals watch warily as he brings in enslaved people, some from the West Indies, speaking French or Creole dialects, to raise a massive plantation house. Murmurs about his fortune and his background persist, but Sutpen's sheer force of character garners a mixture of fascination, fear, and begrudging respect. To cement his standing among Jefferson's white gentry, Sutpen courts and marries Ellen Coldfield, daughter of a respected local merchant. For Ellen, the marriage promises security and status. For Sutpen, it is the next critical step in his design, establishing a socially unquestionable heritage. Together, they have 2 children, Henry and Judith. The grand house at Sutpen's 100 may remain unfinished in various ways, but Sutpen is laser-focused on his heirs, determined that they embody the refinement and social distinction he so fiercely craves. Henry Sutpen is born around 1839, followed a few years later by Judith. Raised in an imposing estate, they experience a life of privilege sustained by their father's wealth and reputation, though the community keeps its distance from the imperious and enigmatic Thomas Sutpen. Henry eventually leaves for the University of Mississippi, where Sutpen hopes he will cultivate the manners and connections befitting a future gentleman of the South. Judith, meanwhile, grows into a poised and strong-willed young woman, bearing traits of both her mother's gentleness and her father's stoicism. The story's central conflict arrives when Henry, at university, bonds with a new friend, Charles Bond, a dashing and cosmopolitan young man from New Orleans. So enamored is Henry with Charles's sophistication that he brings him home to Sutpen's 100, ensuring that Charles meets Judith. Little do any of them know that this fateful friendship will set off a tragic chain of revelations and violence. Charles Bond possesses charm, elegance, and an air of mystery. His Creole background, hinted to include some French lineage, fascinates Henry. Soon enough, Charles and Judith form a romantic connection, and an engagement looms, much to Thomas Sutpen's alarm. The reason is something Henry initially does not know. Charles Bond is actually Sutpen's son from that first marriage in the West Indies. Sutpen's horror stems from both the racial taboo. Charles Bond may have non-white ancestry, and from the incestuous possibility that Judith is unwittingly about to marry her half-brother. Instead of explaining these terrible truths outright, Sutpen attempts to manipulate Henry, fueling the young man's resentment. Unable to comprehend his father's urgency, and suspecting it might be a matter of petty prejudice or class snobbery, Henry sides with Charles Bond. In a dramatic act of rebellion, Henry renounces his inheritance and flees Sutpen's Hundred with Charles, determined to break free from his father's control. As Henry and Charles stand on the brink of scandal and rebellion, the Civil War erupts. This massive conflict momentarily eclipses personal drama as Henry and Charles enlist in the Confederate Army. For 4 years, they fight side by side, forging a deeper bond on the battlefields of the South. Back at home, Judith awaits Charles's return, anticipating their future marriage. Thomas Sutpen, too, serves in the Confederate war effort. By the end of the war, the South is in ruins, a devastation that mirrors the moral decay within the Sutpen family. At some point, Henry discovers the truth about Charles Bond's parentage and the rumors of his mixed-race heritage. Torn between love for his best friend, the horror of incest, and the racially charged codes of the time, Henry wrestles with a choice he never dreamed he would have to make. When the Civil War concludes, Charles Bond travels to Sutpen's Hundred to claim Judith as his bride. Henry, now fully aware of Charles's identity, confronts him at the plantation's gates. Believing that the taboo of incest and the shame of a possible mixed-race marriage cannot be allowed to unfold, Henry takes matters into his own hands. In a moment loaded with betrayal, sorrow, and hopeless resignation, Henry shoots Charles Bond dead. The impact of this murder is cataclysmic. Henry vanishes, leaving behind a broken engagement, a heartbroken sister, and a father whose meticulously crafted legacy is in shards. Judith is robbed of her fiancé. Ellen Coldfield soon dies, and Sutpen is left to grapple with the ruinous consequences of his secret history. Ellen's sister, Rosa Coldfield, emerges as a major voice of anger and disillusionment. She harbors a simmering hatred for Thomas Sutpen and the havoc he has unleashed on her family. When Ellen dies, Miss Rosa is pulled back into Sutpen's orbit in a grotesque twist. Sutpen proposes to her, implying that if she can produce a male heir, only then will he formalize their marriage. Repulsed by this cold-blooded proposition, Rosa flees Sutpen's Hundred, vowing never again to be ensnared by his manipulations. She nurses her bitterness for decades, ultimately enlisting young Quentin Compson to help her uncover or confront whatever secrets remain in the decaying mansion. Rosa's perspective, brimming with Gothic accusation and personal vendetta, filters much of the narrative we receive, even as Faulkner intersperses other viewpoints. The bulk of Absalom comes to us through layers of storytelling long after the events have passed. Quentin Compson, also known from Faulkner's The Sound and The Fury, is a college-bound young man in the early 1900s hailing from Jefferson. Before leaving for Harvard, he is summoned by the elderly Miss Rosa Coldfield to hear the Sutpen story from her perspective. Later, Quentin pieces together additional accounts from his father, Mr. Compson, who provides a more detached historical viewpoint. At Harvard, Quentin and his Canadian roommate Shreve spend long nights reconstructing the Sutpen saga from the fragments they have, filling in gaps with speculation, rumor, and imaginative leaps. Their retelling draws us deeper into the mystery and tragedy of Sutpen's Hundred. Quentin's own emotional entanglement with the South's history underscores a key theme: the weight of collective guilt and the inescapable pull of ancestral sins. Once the Civil War and Bond's murder have shattered his aspirations, Sutpen returns to a ravaged Jefferson. Sutpen's Hundred is a skeleton of its former glory, with a post-war economy in tatters. Despite everything, Sutpen makes one last attempt to secure a male heir, this time turning to Millie, the granddaughter of Wash Jones, a ragged squatter who had been fiercely loyal to him. Sutpen's hopes rest on Millie giving birth to a boy. Tragically for Millie, she delivers a girl, prompting Sutpen to react with dismissive anger. Infuriated by Sutpen's cruelty toward his granddaughter, Wash Jones takes violent revenge, killing Sutpen with a scythe. The patriarch's life ends in a moment of gruesome reckoning, fulfilling the biblical sense of doom forecast by the novel's title. With Thomas Sutpen dead, Judith struggles to maintain the fading remnants of Sutpen's 100 alongside Clitty, a woman born into slavery who is believed to be Sutpen's daughter by an enslaved woman. Clitty remains loyal and protective, even as the mansion decays. Judith tries to salvage something noble from the wreckage. She takes in Charles Etienne de Saint-Valery Bon, the child of Charles Bon and an unknown woman of mixed race in New Orleans. The boy grows up under the gloom of Sutpen's 100, haunted by the knowledge of his father's fate. Time passes. Charles Etienne eventually marries a woman of partial black ancestry, incurring the vicious disapproval of Jefferson's racist society. They have a child, Jim Bond, a boy of even darker features who becomes the final living link to the Sutpen line. Judith herself succumbs to illness, dying quietly while Clitty stands guard over the mansion's lonely corridors. Suddenly, Henry reappears, decades after shooting Charles Bon, slipping back into Sutpen's 100 in secret. Racked by guilt and fear, he hides in an upstairs room, barely surviving under Clitty's care. Miss Rosa hears rumors of his return and, fueled by a mix of righteousness and lingering anger, persuades Quentin Compson to accompany her to the house. Their discovery of Henry alive in a darkened room ignites the novel's final conflagration. As Rosa rushes off to find a doctor, Clitty, terrified that exposing Henry to the authorities or the outside world would bring a final, humiliating end, sets the house on fire. Flames consume the once great mansion. Clitty and Henry perish together in the blaze, sealing the fate of Thomas Sutpen's design in a furious conflagration. Jim Bond, Charles Etienne's son and Sutpen's last known descendant, escapes, howling and roaming the countryside. In the aftermath, the mansion's ashes become a dark symbol of all that Sutpen tried to control and all that ultimately escaped his grasp. His quest to create a perfect Southern dynasty ends in tragedy, leaving behind only a traumatized survivor and the ghostly echoes of a dream turned nightmare. Faulkner's novel illuminates several powerful themes. Burden of the past. The Sutpen family tragedy reveals how historical sins, slavery, racism, pride, cast long shadows. Quentin, an outsider to the Sutpen line, nonetheless becomes captive to its haunting grip. Racial identity and miscegenation. Charles Bond's mixed heritage is the fulcrum upon which Sutpen's design teeters. Faulkner tackles the deeply ingrained racial hierarchies of the Old South, exposing the absurd and tragic consequences of obsessively maintaining purity. Obsessive ambition and hubris. Sutpen's unyielding vision of social ascension leads him to discard his moral compass. His downfall is a stark warning about the corrupting power of unwavering ambition. Incest and taboo. In the near marriage of Charles Bond and Judith, Faulkner accentuates how secrecy poisons family bonds. Henry's eventual murder of Charles is both an act of twisted moral rescue and a tragic betrayal of brotherly love. The fall of the Old South. Sutpen's 100 stands as a microcosm of the antebellum South, built on enslaved labor and racial oppression. The Civil War ravages the empire, and its final destruction by fire symbolizes the collapse of an entire way of life. Character portraits in depth. Thomas Sutpen, a figure of immense willpower, consumed by the dream of founding a legacy that erases his impoverished past. His cruelty, discarding his first wife and son, manipulating potential heirs, and controlling his children's destinies, ensures that he will ultimately reap what he has sown. Henry Sutpen, torn between familial loyalty and moral horror. Henry's life collapses when he learns Charles Bond is both his half-brother and of partial black ancestry. Henry's final act, murdering Bond, exiles him from humanity itself, condemning him to a spectral existence until he perishes in the final conflagration. Judith Sutpen, a steadfast, quietly resolute woman forced to watch her father's ambitions destroy her closest relationships. She radiates dignity and compassion, as evidenced by her caring for Charles Etienne, but her own fate is sealed by Sutpen's legacy. Charles Bond, the charismatic, secret heir to Sutpen, raised in New Orleans. His refined manners and mysterious background captivate Henry and Judith. Charles's very existence embodies the South's darkest taboos of race and incest, and his presence triggers the cataclysmic events of the novel. Miss Rosa Coldfield, driven by bitterness toward Sutpen, Rosa's narrative drips with gothic fury and personal vendetta. She draws Quentin Compson into the tale, seeking a vindication or resolution she herself cannot fully articulate. Clytie, often overlooked in superficial readings, Clytie is Sutpen's enslaved daughter, and later his household servant. Her devotion to the mansion and to Henry in his final days reveals a tragic nobility. In the end, she would rather burn everything than let outside forces tear the last shreds of the family apart. Quentin Compson, though not a Sutpen himself, Quentin inherits the psychological burden of this story. He becomes the vessel through which Faulkner examines how the Old South's ghosts haunt the modern era. Faulkner's Mississippi resonates with decaying pillars of aristocracy, grand mansions rotting from within, humidity so thick it stifles logic, and a community's unspoken acceptance of racial injustice. Before the Civil War, Thomas Sutpen's empire stands as a testament to how illusions of gentility and superiority can mask sinister realities. The war's aftermath leaves the South ravaged, dethroning men like Sutpen who built fortunes on coerced labor and rigid social codes. Faulkner heightens the Gothic atmosphere with images of darkened hallways, flickering candles, and a final, all-consuming fire. This blend of historical realism and almost supernatural dread communicates that the past never truly fades. It lingers and festers in the memory of those who remain. While we've laid out the events chronologically for clarity, Faulkner himself presents them through a kaleidoscope of narrators. Miss Rosa's indignant recollections, Mr. Compson's more philosophical stance, Quentin's haunted wonder, and Shreve's outsider curiosity. Each new lens adds competing details, bridging gaps with conjecture and rumor. This mosaic approach reinforces a key theme. History is mutable, shaped as much by interpretation as by objective fact. Did Henry fully grasp Charles Bond's racial background prior to the murder? Could Sutpen have saved his family if he'd told the truth earlier? These questions linger, blurred by the subjectivity of each retelling. In Faulkner's hands, The truth is an elusive tapestry, yet all versions point to the same inevitable tragedy. Beneath the novel's labyrinthine structure lies an emotional epicenter of grief and guilt. Sutpen's ambition warps every relationship around him, turning children into pawns and lovers into obstacles. Henry's betrayal of Charles stems from a desperate bid to prevent incest and social condemnation, but it destroys both men's lives. Judith's quiet endurance testifies to the collateral damage that such a design inflicts on innocent bystanders. Miss Rose's bitterness underscores how deeply Sutpen's manipulations corrode entire families across generations. Even Quentin, who learns of the Sutpen saga decades later, finds himself unable to escape its resonance. Faulkner masterfully uses Quentin's perspective to illustrate that the tragedies of the past are not dead, but remain unsettling forces in the collective memory. The haunting climax occurs when Miss Rosa, determined to expose or redeem the last Sutpen heir, drags Quentin Compson to Sutpen's 100. They find Henry, frail and close to death, hidden upstairs by Clitty. Attempting to bring medical help, Rosa unknowingly triggers Clitty's desperate act, setting the mansion on fire to protect Henry from the justice or condemnation of the outside world. In the roaring flames, Henry and Clitty meet their end. Their deaths cap the Sutpen saga with apocalyptic finality, as if the mansion itself, once a monument to grand ambition, will not suffer to stand any longer. That Jim Bond remains alive, an orphan of uncertain lineage, emotionally unmoored, speaks to the residue of history's sins. He howls in the darkness, symbolizing the final, uncontainable legacy of Sutpen's illusions. Absalom, Absalom sits among Faulkner's most intricate works, richly layered with narrative complexity and a fearless depiction of race, power, and identity in the South. Rather than offering a neat moral, Faulkner underscores how ambition rooted in cruelty breeds ruin for all. Sutpen's tragic flaw, his refusal to accept any chink in the armor of his idealized empire, points to the larger hypocrisy of a society built on the subjugation of human beings. Each retelling stirs up questions about complicity and memory. How does one live with the knowledge of a rotted foundation? Faulkner's answer seems to be that such knowledge will inevitably resurface, often in violent or haunting ways. By exposing the twisted genealogies and repressed truths behind Sutpen's 100, Faulkner confronts the deeper American struggle with race, legacy, and the illusions of grandeur. The novel's abiding power lies in its psychological intensity. The simmering tension between father and sons, the painful love between siblings, the simmering resentments of women who have been used as pawns, all are rendered with a mythic weight. When Henry raises his pistol against Charles Bond, readers feel not just the shock of a personal betrayal, but the dark gravity of a society determined to uphold its most rigid taboos. As time marches on, Quentin Compson's obsession with the Sutpen story mirrors our own collective grappling with history. Faulkner forces us to ask, are we doomed to repeat the sins we refuse to acknowledge? Is an honest reckoning with the past the only path to any semblance of progress? The novel's final image, Jim Bond wandering aimlessly, remains a chilling reminder of the human cost of bigotry, secrecy, and unbridled ambition. By weaving themes of incest, race, pride, and betrayal into a story that spans decades, Faulkner cements Absalom as a cornerstone of American literature. It is at once a a macabre family saga, and a fierce indictment of the cultural underpinnings of the Old South. Through multiple narrators, Faulkner peels back layers of time and perception, forcing us to reconcile contradictory versions of events, a method that mirrors the deeply human process of remembering and misremembering the past. Despite its grandeur, Absalom is also an intensely intimate story about individuals devoured by obsessions they cannot control. Thomas Sutpen's design is not just a dream of a perfect plantation family. It is a reckless defiance of both moral and societal constraints that eventually blows back with the fury of a biblical plague. The conflagration that ends the novel signifies the cataclysmic downfall of every false premise upon which Sutpen built his life. And so the fate of Sutpen's 100 is sealed in a raging inferno, a final judgment on the lies, betrayals, and blind ambitions that shaped its walls. What began with one man's humiliating revelation and fierce thirst for power culminates in the total annihilation of everything he sought to forge: his house, his heirs, and even the twisted illusions of purity he tried to enshrine. As the flames devour Sutpen's empire, they cast long shadows that stretch far beyond Mississippi, reminding us that no dream built on deceit and oppression can endure unscathed. From the dying breath of Thomas Sutpen to the anguished cries of Jim Bond, this story reverberates with the resounding echoes of guilt, heritage, and the relentless pursuit of an unattainable ideal. Through Quentin Compson's eyes, we witness the torch of history passed forward, burdening the next generation with questions about accountability and the cost of denying our own legacies. Absalom endures as one of William Faulkner's greatest achievements, burning bright with cautionary power, a timeless epic reminding us that the embers of the past must be reckoned with or risk igniting anew. Hello everyone, and welcome to this comprehensive, spoiler-filled journey through Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's timeless classic, The Little Prince. Whether you've never read the book or are looking for an in-depth refresher, this summary aims to guide you, step by step, through the entire narrative, from the moment our unnamed narrator crash lands his plane in the Sahara Desert to the bittersweet final moments shared with his mysterious little friend. We'll delve into the vivid settings, unravel the emotional and philosophical underpinnings, and meet the unforgettable characters who populate this tender, magical story. By the end, you'll have a thorough understanding of the plot, themes, and heartfelt messages that have endeared this book to readers for generations. So, buckle up and let's begin. The Little Prince opens with a reflection from the narrator, who is also the author's stand-in, about his childhood experience with grown-ups. He recalls that when he was 6, he encountered a striking image in a book about the jungle: a boa constrictor swallowing its prey. In his childlike wonder, he decided to draw his own version of this snake, first from the outside, then from the inside. However, every adult he showed it to misinterpreted his drawings. Instead of seeing a snake digesting an elephant, they saw a hat. This early anecdote, presented in a slightly playful yet longing tone, establishes two central themes of the book: the limitations of adult perception and the power of a child's imagination. As the narrator grows up, he becomes a pilot, an occupation that is closely tied to Saint-Exupéry's own life experiences. Although he pilots airplanes and navigates mechanical realities, he has never lost his desire to see the world through childlike eyes. And it's this capacity for wonder that sets the stage for the story to come. We sense that he's waiting for someone who can truly understand his drawings and his imaginative heart. The real adventure begins when the narrator crash lands his airplane in the Sahara Desert. Far from any habitation, and with only a limited supply of water, he faces a predicament. Unless he can repair his plane, he may not survive for long. This stark situation exudes tension and vulnerability, immersing us immediately in the bleakness of the scorching desert. Yet, rather than focusing solely on his dire circumstances, the narrator remains contemplative. He's worried, yes, but there is a sense of philosophical calm in his tone. On his first night in the desert, just as he drifts off to sleep, he's awakened by a strange little voice asking him, "If you please, draw me a sheep." Startled, the narrator jolts awake to find the little prince. Here is a young boy, standing in the desert, seemingly out of nowhere, politely demanding a drawing of a sheep. The narrator is both confounded and strangely at ease, as though he's been waiting for this moment his entire life. He tries to draw a sheep for the boy, but repeatedly fails to meet the little prince's satisfaction. Eventually, almost in exasperation, he draws a simple box with holes in it, saying that the sheep he wants is inside. Amazingly, the little prince is delighted with this solution, and so their friendship begins. From the very start, the little prince's presence is enchanting. He has a regal posture to him, a quiet confidence that seems both childlike and wise. Immediately, we sense that he is no ordinary child, and the narrator recognizes this too. His curiosity sparks countless questions about where this little prince has come from and why he's in the desert. Yet the little prince, true to a child's nature, ignores many questions and focuses on his own concerns. Throughout their early interactions, we see that the narrator's world is about to open up into something much more expansive than a desert plane crash. As the two form a companionable bond in the desert, the little prince begins to share bits and pieces of his story, albeit in a somewhat disjointed and whimsical way. Over the course of several mornings and evenings, as the narrator works on fixing his plane, the little prince offers glimpses of his own home, which he calls Asteroid B612. We learn that his tiny planet is only about the size of a house. It has 3 volcanoes, 2 active and 1 extinct. He regularly sweeps the volcanoes to keep them from erupting or filling with ashes. This, in itself, is a wonderful testament to the little prince's diligence and sense of responsibility. Even though his planet is small and he is alone, he takes the task seriously, regarding it as essential to the well-being of his home. On his planet, there are also baobab seeds that, if neglected, can grow into gigantic trees capable of splitting the planet apart. The little prince is keenly aware that vigilance is necessary to prevent such destruction. Each day, he meticulously uproots any new sprouts. This scene underscores a deeper theme about how small problems, if left unattended, can overwhelm us. As the narrator listens, he finds himself more and more fascinated by how the little prince regards the cosmos. In a single quiet conversation, we understand that the little prince's universe is simple in its physical scope, but infinite in its emotional and philosophical depth. He sees stars, he sees sunsets, he sees volcanoes, and he sees them all with a sense of profound wonder. Through these initial revelations, Saint-Exupéry gently guides us to reflect on our own tendencies to overcomplicate life. Soon, the little prince describes a significant element of his life on Asteroid B612, a mysterious rose that he loves dearly. One day, a seed drifts onto his little planet and grows into a rose of breathtaking beauty. The rose is vain, proud, and delicate. She demands constant attention and care, shelter under a glass globe at night, protection from the wind, admiration of her beauty. At first, the little prince is captivated by her uniqueness. He's entranced by her color and the softness of her petals. He's filled with a longing to keep her safe. But the rose's vanity and occasional haughtiness confuse him. She tells him half-truths, like needing a screen at night because of the cold or claiming tigers might come, even though there are no tigers. Over time, the little prince, who genuinely loves her, grows uncertain of her sincerity and becomes frustrated by her self-absorption. He doesn't quite understand how to reconcile the deeper, quiet love he has for her with her outward, often contradictory behavior. This tension builds inside him until he decides that maybe he needs to leave. He wonders if his Rose doesn't truly care for him, or if she's just too proud to say it. In one of the book's most poignant moments, the Rose indirectly tries to apologize, implying she does love him, but can't express it well. Yet her words remain somewhat cryptic, drenched in pride. Ultimately, the little prince chooses to depart from asteroid B612 to see what else lies out in the wider universe. Even so, the Rose remains embedded in his heart, and her presence shapes his entire emotional journey. Through this subplot, Saint-Exupéry subtly comments on the complexities of love and the misunderstandings that can arise from simple miscommunications. The Little Prince's travels, encounters with adult archetypes. When he departs his tiny planet, the Little Prince visits a series of other asteroids or small planets, each inhabited by a single adult figure. Each of these encounters offers a commentary on different adult behaviors and fixations. Let's explore them in the order that the Little Prince meets them, as it helps illustrate not only the prince's growing understanding of the adult world, but also the universal foibles of adulthood. The King. The first planet is inhabited by a man who claims to be a king with absolute power. He insists that everyone is his subject, despite there being no one else on his tiny planet. His commands are always tailored to appear reasonable. He only orders what can naturally happen anyway, like ordering the sun to set at sunset. The Little Prince finds this curious. What is the point of absolute authority if you cannot meaningfully command people to do something unexpected? We see that the king's obsession is rooted in power and control. Yet ironically, he exerts no real control over anyone. This highlights the absurdity of power for power's sake. The Vain Man. On the second planet, the Little Prince meets a vain man who wants nothing more than to be admired. He wears a peculiar hat meant for doffing in response to applause. But since no one else is around, the only potential applause must come from the Little Prince. This vain man represents adult narcissism, living solely for external validation. The Little Prince, perplexed by the vanity on display, leaves, concluding that this man is simply too superficial for meaningful conversation. The Drunkard. Next, the Little Prince arrives on a planet occupied by a drunkard, who sits amid empty and full bottles alike. The prince, feeling compassion, asks him why he drinks. The drunkard answers that he drinks to forget, and he wants to forget that he is ashamed of drinking. This circular logic deeply saddens the Little Prince, who sees in it a hopeless cycle. The adult here embodies how people can become trapped in cycles of behavior that fill them with guilt, yet they lack the will or tools to break free. The Businessman. The fourth planet belongs to a businessman who is constantly counting stars, convinced that by counting them, he somehow owns them. He has no time for conversation. He's too busy calculating how many stars he possesses. The Little Prince finds this notion ridiculous. How can you own something as vast and intangible as the stars? The businessman's fixation exemplifies adult greed and the obsession with tangible ownership, missing out on the simple pleasure or deeper meaning those stars might represent. The Lamplighter. On the fifth planet, the Little Prince meets a lamplighter, a man tasked with lighting a lamp each evening and extinguishing it each morning. However, the planet spins faster and faster now, so day and night pass in rapid succession. Consequently, the lamplighter works tirelessly without rest, lighting and extinguishing the lamp every few minutes. Even though he's faithful to his orders, there's no practical reason behind this frantic activity anymore. This figure is a gentle, almost tragic illustration of blind obedience and routine, continuing a job long after its original purpose no longer fits the reality of the situation. The little prince actually likes the lamplighter, finding him less absurd than the other characters, because at least his job brings light to others. The geographer. Finally, the little prince visits the planet of a geographer, who records the mountains, rivers, and other features of far-off places. Yet he never leaves his desk to see these wonders for himself. The geographer relies entirely on explorers' reports, but he seems unconcerned with the ephemeral nature of certain things, like flowers, because he only wants to record what is eternal. This frustrates the little prince, especially when he realizes that his rose is ephemeral, thus not something a geographer would even consider noting. It dawns on him that the things most precious to him, his rose, are fragile, fleeting, and easily overlooked by those who only value what seems permanent. Here, the little prince finally decides he must visit Earth. The geographer suggests that Earth might be worth a trip since it has a good reputation. Thus, the stage is set for the little prince to arrive on Earth, and ultimately for him to meet our narrator in the desert. When the little prince lands on Earth, he finds it to be much larger than any planet he's visited so far. He arrives in the middle of a desert, presaging his eventual meeting with the narrator. But before encountering the pilot, he traverses various landscapes, meeting other creatures and reflecting on human nature. One of the first beings he meets is a snake. This snake, coiled in the desert sand, speaks in riddles and claims a certain power. It can return people to the place they came from, or, in a cryptic sense, it can facilitate journeys beyond. The little prince doesn't fully grasp the implications, but we as readers sense an omen. The snake, in many mythic and literary traditions, symbolizes both temptation and transformation. Here, it seems to hint at the power to help the little prince return to his star. Though it's a brief interaction, it foreshadows the end of the story. Eventually, the little prince stumbles upon a rose garden. To his shock, he sees thousands of roses that look just like his rose back home. This devastates him. He had believed his rose was unique in the universe. Yet here is an entire garden of them, equally beautiful. He feels betrayed. Was his rose not special, after all? This crisis strikes at the heart of his affection and sense of identity. If his rose is common, does that mean his care and love for her were misplaced? He wrestles with sorrow and embarrassment, realizing he's not quite so wealthy in having a singular beloved rose. It's a painful moment of disillusionment, puncturing the idealistic bubble he held around his rose's uniqueness. In the midst of this sadness, the little prince meets a fox, arguably one of the most important characters in the story. The fox initially isn't interested in the prince, but then expresses a desire to be tamed. The concept of taming, as the fox describes it, means establishing ties to create a bond so that each party becomes unique to the other. The fox explains that, right now, the prince is just a little boy to him, like 100,000 other little boys, and the fox is just a fox like 100,000 other foxes. But if the prince tames him, they will need each other, creating a meaningful relationship. This concept resonates profoundly with the prince, especially in light of his disillusionment after seeing the rose garden. The fox teaches him a new way to interpret uniqueness. It's not about physical appearance alone, but about the emotional connection and the time and care invested in another. The fox says famously, "You become responsible forever for what you have tamed." These wise words echo the central theme of the story. Love and friendship make someone or something unique. It's not about rarity in the physical sense. It's about the intangible bond that sets your beloved apart from all others. Moved by the fox's wisdom, the little prince tames the fox. Day by day, they draw closer, following a ritual of meeting at the same hour, sitting a little nearer each time until trust grows. When it's time for the prince to move on, the fox is sad but tells him that taming has brought him joy and that the color of the wheat fields, matching the prince's golden hair, will forever remind him of the prince. This parting scene is bittersweet, symbolizing the beauty of relationships that end but leave lasting imprints on the heart. After leaving the fox, the little prince returns to the rose garden. With his new perspective, he realizes that, despite their outward similarity, none of these thousands of roses are his rose. She is indeed unique, because it's his love that makes her singular. The time he spent caring for her, worrying about her, and listening to her trivial complaints has set her apart from every other rose in the universe. This revelation transforms the prince's earlier despair into a powerful acceptance of responsibility and love. He recognizes that true uniqueness stems from the bonds we form with others, not from superficial characteristics. Before he meets the narrator, the little prince has two more encounters that further reveal adult preoccupations. First, he meets a railway switchman who controls the tracks, sending trains full of people speeding in one direction or another. The switchman notes that adults are always restless, never satisfied where they are, and that children are the only ones pressing their faces against the train windows, savoring the journey. This paints yet another portrait of adult life as relentless motion without clear purpose or joy. Next, the prince meets a sales clerk selling pills that quench thirst. The clerk advertises them as time-saving. By not having to drink water, one can save 53 minutes a week. The little prince is perplexed. If he had 53 extra minutes, he says, he'd prefer to walk slowly toward a spring of fresh water, savoring it. Again, we see the prince's childlike, yet profoundly philosophical perspective on life. The simplest pleasures often get cast aside in pursuit of efficiency, yet it's those very pleasures that give life meaning. Finally, we circle back to the story's present timeline, where the prince meets the pilot narrator in the Sahara Desert. The narrator's plane is broken. He is trying to fix it before his water supply runs out. Meanwhile, he's also enthralled by the little prince's stories. As the prince recounts his travels, the narrator grows ever more invested in this child's worldview, feeling it resonate with his own faintly remembered childhood sense of wonder. As days pass, they grow closer. The prince continues to ask the narrator to draw sheep, a muzzle, and other small objects that might help him protect his precious rose. The narrator, initially frustrated by the demands, begins to see that these drawings and stories are more than idle fancy. They are lifelines to the prince's emotional world, a deep reflection of how the prince's planet and rose exist in his heart. The narrator also realizes the precariousness of the prince's life. He is a visitor from a star, vulnerable yet profoundly open-hearted. At one point, they run out of water, forcing them to embark on a search for a well. Exhausted and parched, they press on through the desert. This physically challenging trek becomes a metaphor for spiritual searching. The prince, uncomplaining, shares a timeless childlike observation. What makes the desert beautiful is that somewhere it hides a well. This line encapsulates the prince's hopeful worldview, suggesting that unseen wonders are present, waiting to be discovered, even in the harshest of terrains. Their perseverance pays off, and they discover a hidden well in the desert, a small miracle that revives them. As they drink the sweet, life-giving water, the narrator compares its taste to the joys of childhood memories. It is a moment of solace, love, and reflection, deepening their bond. As the story nears its climax, the prince reveals that he is nearing the end of his earthly sojourn. He has made a deal with the snake to help him return to his star. The concept is both mysterious and unsettling. The snake earlier implied he could send the prince back from whence he came, which sounds like a euphemism for death. Yet the prince speaks of it more as a transcendence, leaving his physical body behind, as if it were a shell, too heavy to take on his journey back home. He tells the narrator that he must return because his rose is waiting for him, alone and unprotected. Despite the rose's prickly behavior, the prince loves her profoundly and feels responsible for her. The narrator is torn by grief. He doesn't want to lose this precious friend who's transformed his worldview. But the prince is resolute. He knows that the essential things in life are often invisible to the eye. One must look with the heart. On the night the prince has arranged to leave, the narrator follows him, worried about the snake. They meet at a ruined stone wall near the place where the prince first arrived on Earth. The little prince reassures the narrator, saying that after his departure, the narrator should not dwell on his empty body, for it's just an earthly shell. The prince comforts his friend by telling him that when he looks up at the stars, he'll be able to laugh, thinking of the prince's laughter. Because the prince's home is among the stars, whenever the narrator looks up at them, it will be as if they are bells laughing. The prince says, "You will have 500 million little bells," referencing the businessman's obsession with numbers, but reinterpreting it to remind the narrator of childlike wonder rather than adult greed. In a moment that is both tragic and beautiful, the snake bites the little prince's ankle. The prince collapses silently in the sand. The narrator, grief-stricken, tries to find his friend's body the next morning but finds no trace of him. The desert is empty, save for the quiet aura that something profound has happened. The narrator repairs his plane shortly after the prince's departure and manages to leave the desert. But his heart has changed. He is no longer the same pilot who once scorned grown-ups' inability to see beyond hats and big numbers. The bond he forged with the prince has rekindled his childlike wonder, both a gift and a burden, for he deeply misses the little prince's presence. In the final pages, the narrator addresses us directly. He shows us a sketch of the desert landscape where the prince fell to earth. He wonders if the little prince truly returned to his star, or if perhaps he might return one day. Then comes an invitation to readers. If we ever travel through the Sahara Desert and happen to see a place that looks like his drawing, we should pause a moment. If a mysterious child with golden hair approaches us, asking us to draw a sheep, we'll know exactly who he is. Thus, the book ends with a wistful openness, inviting readers to believe in the intangible, to remain open to wonders that defy adult logic, and to keep love and friendship at the heart of their experience. While we've journeyed through the story's events, it's worth reflecting on the key themes that underpin The Little Prince. These themes offer the narrative its enduring power and universal relevance. Childhood versus adulthood. From the pilot's opening musings about his childhood drawing to the prince's luminous perspective on the world, The story highlights how adults often lose their sense of wonder, becoming entrenched in mundane concerns like power, vanity, greed, and rigid routines. The prince's travels among the adult archetypes underscore these follies, suggesting that reawakening childlike curiosity and empathy is essential for a meaningful life. Love and responsibility. The Rose is central to this theme. Love is not about perfection or exclusivity in appearance. It's about the care, time, and emotional investment that makes someone, or something, unique to us. The prince's devotion to his rose embodies the notion that if we love, we are responsible for the object of that love. Friendship and taming. Through the fox, the book teaches that genuine connection involves vulnerability and the establishment of ties. Taming isn't about ownership, but about forging an emotional bond that transforms both parties. This echoes the idea that we only truly see one another when we invest time and open our hearts. Seeing with the heart. One of the story's most famous lines is, "What is essential is invisible to the eye." We're reminded that external appearances, superficial achievements, and quantifiable metrics like counting stars fail to capture the essence of what makes life meaningful, be it love, loyalty, or the intangible joy of shared laughter. The ephemeral and the eternal. The prince is distressed to learn that his rose is ephemeral. This tension between the temporary nature of life's most cherished things and the eternal or cosmic scale on which the geographer operates forms a poignant reflection on human existence. We cherish life because it is fleeting. We must see it as precious while it lasts. The setting of the desert is crucial. Its vast emptiness, its shimmering horizons, and its treacherous conditions symbolize both isolation and the potential for self-discovery. Stranded there, the narrator confronts the raw essentials of life: thirst, survival, and the necessity of hope. The desert amplifies the prince's quiet wisdom, allowing his voice to echo more profoundly. The starlit night sky appears repeatedly, representing infinite mystery and possibility. The prince comes from the stars. The businessman counts them. The narrator eventually sees them as laughing bells. Stars in Saint-Exupéry's hands become an emblem of spiritual truths that outshine materialist or adult concerns. The rose is another potent symbol. She is simultaneously fragile and strong, proud and vulnerable. She hints at how real love can be complicated. It's not always about harmony or understanding. Sometimes it's about enduring confusion, hurt feelings, and the delicate dance of pride and insecurity that can characterize close relationships. Yet the rose's vulnerability calls on the prince's, and by extension, the reader's, instinct to protect and cherish. Lastly, the fox stands as an embodiment of wisdom through friendship. Its invitation to be tamed marks a turning point in the prince's emotional arc. The rituals of taming speak to the patience and empathy needed to truly know another being. The fox's departure, though sad, cements the lesson that love is meaningful precisely because it must be nurtured, and it sometimes leads to pain. Despite its brevity as a novella, The Little Prince resonates with readers across ages and cultures, in large part due to its profound emotional honesty. It captures the child's voice within us that wonders at the world, yearns for meaningful friendships, and struggles to comprehend adult contradictions. At the same time, it addresses the adult in us who has faced loneliness, heartbreak, and nostalgia for simpler times. The interplay between heartbreak and hope underscores the final chapters. The prince's departure is tragic for the narrator, yet there is a luminous acceptance that the prince's love for his rose compels him to go. This bittersweet mixture of sorrow and transcendence is central to the emotional power of the story. We're left with a sense that love endures beyond physical separation. The prince's essence remains, shining among the stars. In the end, The Little Prince is a story about rediscovering wonder, love, and compassion in a world that often seems obsessed with trivial pursuits and narrow-minded definitions of success. Through the eyes of a little boy from a distant asteroid, we are shown just how odd adult life can appear. Yet we're also reminded that the childlike capacity to see with the heart is not lost forever. It can be rekindled in any of us if we open ourselves to relationships that make us vulnerable, that ask for responsibility, and that offer the transforming power of genuine love. Even decades after its publication, the book continues to charm, console, and challenge readers. Its iconic illustrations, particularly the image of the little prince himself, golden hair blowing in the wind, have become cultural touchstones. People across the globe quote lines like, "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly," or "You become responsible forever for what you have tamed," because they strike at the fundamental truths of human connection. So, if you find yourself looking up at the night sky and pondering the stars, remember that they may ring with laughter, especially if you've had a friend like the Little Prince. And if you find that your heart yearns for simpler, purer joys, for deeper friendships unclouded by adult vanity, then perhaps you still carry the Little Prince's spirit within you. We've taken a long, detailed journey through The Little Prince, ensuring a full, spoiler-friendly retelling of its essential events, characters, and themes. From the pilot's crash in the desert, through the prince's recollections of his rose and his travels to other asteroids, to his painful discovery of a rose garden on Earth and his enlightening friendship with the fox, every step adds color and depth to Saint-Exupéry's luminous vision. Ultimately, the story's emotional climax in the desert, followed by the prince's return to the stars, cements the tale's abiding messages of love, responsibility, and looking with one's heart. Thanks for joining me in this comprehensive summary. I hope that even if you've never read the book, you now feel immersed in its world and understand the profound beauty behind the Little Prince's journey. And if you have read it before, perhaps this exploration has reminded you why the story remains so beloved. It taps into our universal longing for authentic connection and offers a gentle but powerful critique of the way adults lose sight of life's simplest treasures. No matter how many times you revisit The Little Prince, each reading can reveal new depths, because, after all, what is essential is invisible to the eye, but it resides forever in the heart.